a shame that you can't see all the beautiful coalition pieces. That's a shame. Oh, well, you can at least look at rank and screen if there's anything. So you can see it from there, the pieces. Because rank and can see all the pieces.
What time is this?
So...
First day, right?
Alright, so let me go on my notes. So what I was going to say,
So... that far up? Did they start there?
Yeah, we had the entirely wrong idea of where they started.
Alright, so guys, so this is going to be the in-game briefing meeting of the March on the Rhine campaign. So there's a few people in here who weren't in the campaign as players who are on the Discord, so I'm gonna explain a bit what this event is. So this was a campaign that I ran for I think like 6 months or 5 months in real lifetime. It started in June or July this year, something like that, and now it's early December. And this campaign ran for, I think it was an in-game week or less. It wasn't really that much of time at all. And
so much happened.
Yeah, yet so much happened. And I'll be talking quite a bit and kind of lead the conversation, but this doesn't mean that you can't jump in and talk as well. So it won't be just a boring monologue, so go ahead. But first we'll start with the idea of the campaign. So what I basically had in mind when I was creating this campaign, so I wanted to host a sizable play-by-post game where players moved pieces on a strategic map, and on the strategic map they could basically zoom in and just fight up battles on the zoomed in game map, and these battles would be then fought in live battles, basically in the IKS Open Saturday games. So I basically wanted it to make it show so it was accessible players, so basically anyone could jump in and play the Open Saturday games, even if they weren't a player in the campaign. And they could at the same time, someone could also at the same time move pieces in a campaign. So there was basically more of a backstory and more important stuff going on behind the Open Saturday games, and it was also to make the Open Saturday games a bit more realistic, since you don't really want to fight to the death if the battle is going to have some kind of continuation possibly, so you don't want to throw out your troops to die if they might have to face another enemy in the future. So in the scenario, it's November 2nd, 1813. That's the day before the campaign really starts, and the French army has been beaten in the Battle of Leipzig and is basically on the run to France and is being pursued by the coalition army. The coalition army is of course also quite bloodied after the Battle of Leipzig, and as such it hasn't really been able to commit all of its troops to chase the French army. And Emperor Napoleon has decided that he's ordered one of his marshals to defeat the coalition vanguard that's pursuing his forces, and he wants his marshal to decisively defeat the enemy vanguard to buy time for the rest of the French forces in France, or / also to inflict casualties on a vulnerable enemy force. And the coalition has been ordered by the superior high command to follow the French forces to the Rhine, and they have heard that there are French forces near the Rhine who are who are trying to retreat, or who are basically vulnerable and they can be attacked by the coalition to inflict some losses on the French forces. Well, actually, why should I start trying to explain what the idea for the scenario is, since I have so many players here who were commanders in the scenario itself, and they can tell me what they thought the objective was and what they thought of the briefing. But basically, before I move on to that, we have this first turn of the game loaded here, and the first turn basically skipped a day of in-game time. Later the turns, these first few turns until both sides saw each other, were each one day. But after both sides made some kind of contact, the turns began to be about 4 to 5 hours of in-game time. So the turns were morning, midday, afternoon, evening, and then there was a night turn where basically most of the time people just slept or moved troops around some distances. So the French forces started here in the southwest in Lorch, however you pronounce that. The French forces in the scenario had crossed the Rhine with pontoon bridges, or they had troops come from the east, which was the case for the Sun troops here in the east. So the French forces deployed in 3 locations on the southern part of the map. And the coalition forces in the north, meanwhile, started in 3 points on the map: the Russians in the west, and the Austrians and the German states in the center, and in the east you had the Prussians. And both sides had pretty free hands in deciding what to do. What the intention was here by starting both sides on the ends of the map was to make it so that both sides had as much as room to maneuver as possible, so they could basically do whatever they wanted. And I also wanted the game briefing to be quite simple as well. It was basically defeat the enemy, and the high command for each side needed to really think of their objective for their subordinate commanders. There were commander-in-chiefs for each side, and then they had division commanders, and then these division commanders had brigade commanders. And also, something I want to mention is players were each one of these small pieces on the board you see that has a name written on them is a brigade. And you can see these big name pieces here, which are not going to show up later. They are going to show the name of the actual formation, so you can at a glance see which the unit these brigades belong to. So basically, it was only about 2 or 3 corps versus 2 or 3 corps in this campaign. So it was a relatively small campaign. And what I wanted to do with this small campaign, why I chose this smaller campaign size instead of a bigger one, was because I wanted the battles to potentially be quite small. I basically wanted to have there be potential for like 1v1 brigade versus brigade skirmishes that could happen in real life. And it also fit the scenario, since this campaign is kind of inspired by the Battle of Hanau, which was a relatively small battle. And I also a big thing was that I didn't really want this campaign to last potentially for real life years, because there were just so many troops left on the table which could be defeated. So basically, I wanted to make it so that if one side plays their cards right, they could basically end the campaign in just one battle, which made the game slightly more interesting as well. But yeah, let's start with the players. So over here we have in this version, or not all of the players certainly, like the French Marshal himself is missing, who was Marshal of France Martin Renard for the French side, who was the French forces commander-in-chief. Well, he was arrested by his own forces at the later stages of the campaign, so I guess it kind of makes sense that he isn't here. But we do have for the coalition side, the commander of the Austrian Corps, whose name is, let me check, because he was very insistent that he was called by his full title. The commander-in-chief of the Austrian forces, General of Cavalry, His Excellency, General of the Cavalry, Johann Josef Cajetan Graf von Klenau-Freiherr von Janowitz. Here was leader of the Austrian Corps. And then we have also General Lieutenant Hans-Georg von der Marwitz. And we also had a Russian commander-in-chief for the Russian Corps, General Lieutenant Joseph Cornelius O'Rourke, who fittingly isn't here either, but it fits because he had quite a dramatic fate after one of the battles. But yeah, so
He was murdered.
yes, you could say that. We'll come on to that later. But yes. Leader of the coalition forces, Your Excellencies, which one of you would like to start and basically explain what was your thought process behind the first turn? How did you plan for this game? How did you interpret the briefing, and were there any difficulties you faced?
Do you want to go first, Ninja, or should I?
I think you should go ahead since you made the plan.
So, early in the game, one of the...
Excuse me, you're the Prussian commander, correct? So
Yes,
just as everyone knows.
I was the commander of the Prussians, and there was early tensions with the coalition command, mostly because I never used my cohort's full titles. So he started getting annoyed at me, and we started getting annoyed at each other. I mostly didn't do this on purpose, but we were RPing our characters very differently. I was trying to be a kind of like no-nonsense Prussian, and he was a lot of nonsense Austrian. So we were trying to determine who would be the coalition commander, and I suggested a plan initially, which is the one that we went with, which was the coalition would attack the Lahn River, which is the big river in the middle, along 3 angles. And the goal was, we had some pontoon bridges, and my intention was that the Austrians, who had the heavy cavalry and a good set of grenadiers, and the Prussians, who had light cavalry but a large division of militia and some grenadiers, would stay close together and kind of go across the lawn at about the same position, and then we would concentrate, because I had assumed the French would either try and defend the lawn, or they would concentrate on the hills south of the lawn, because there wasn't really much, and we ended up fighting a lot of battles in those hills south of the lawn, which is where I assumed you would concentrate to defend. And the goal was to attack the lawn at multiple points, and since we couldn't couldn't determine where the French would choose to concentrate, we would spread out and scout. And the Russian corps, which I determined was the most flexible because it had some divisions of infantry and light cavalry that would allow them to kind of scout out the enemy and determine the situation out better than I felt like my own cavalry could do, because I had half of my cavalry was landwehr, and I didn't think they were very up to the task. They would cross at Nassau with pontoon bridges, and we would have them loop in towards the center of the map. So we thought that this was a pretty flexible plan. And what really broke down communications initially was the original players of the two German minor states were horrified at this plan and were saying that we were using them as cannon fodder, and it was a whole mess of just arguments where both Ninja and my character, I think this was our first bonding moment, because we both kind of turned to each other and we were like, are you insane? We're not trying to kill you. We're just moving forward. Like, you just happen to be part of the move forward. And that resulted in me accepting. I had initially pushed for overall command, but because there was so much strife with the German miners, and the original Russian player also supported the German miners, but he later changed. The Russian player supported me for command, and the German miners were being problems, and so I said, all right, fuck it. Oh, I guess I shouldn't curse, but if someone's recording, I apologize. I said, we'll just make the Austrian the commander. And that kind of, me, like, kind of pushing command onto accepting the Austrian as the overall commander, kind of quieted that, because the Russians now had to support my wishes. And that's how we determined who was going to be in overall command.
Yeah, I want to add real quick that yes, there was. I wanted to have an interesting problem in this game, for the coalition, especially to kind of see how it worked out. Basically, the coalition, since they were an ad hoc vanguard formation, which had been sort of hastily formed to combat the French forces, they didn't really have a appointed commander. So there were quite a few high-ranking commanders on the coalition side. You had the Russians, the Austrians, the Prussians, and then two German states brigades. You had the one led by Prince Karl of Bavaria and the other one led by Grand Duke Alexander of Württemberg. And there was some drama in the planning phase, as the Prussian commander explained. I can, for example, read from the coalition head Cartwright channel that the Württembergian commander wrote in the meeting, "You are lucky we offer our support in the first place, but we, the independent German units, will not be the first to meet with the enemy for Austria's sake. It is poorly conceived to place independent units at the head of the Austrian forces." So that was just a small snippet of the conversations there. There was quite a lot of drama between these distinguished gentlemen.
Yeah, I think I called them insane at one point. Like, it was like, it was funny.
Yeah. Meanwhile, for the French, they had one marshal leading the whole operation, who had been chosen by the emperor himself for this mission. And he also had appointed, it seemed like, General de la Perrière, 1st Division, to lead the eastern side of the French forces, which was to be known as de la Perrière's Corps. So, Austrian Commander, Your Excellency von Klernau, do you have something you would want to say?
At times I thought that the independent German miners were also very annoying, but it ended up working out. They did quite well, I believe, especially the Bavarians and the Württembergians as well, of course. They held the southern front at Dietz in the end quite well. I was somewhat happy that the roleplay eventually died down a little bit. The first few days were very it was quite a lot of work to get into the roleplay all the time and write huge messages. Yeah.
I liked the roleplay a lot, but part of the problem was that Ninja and I were both in very different time zones. So like we only had we didn't have a ton of time to kind of discuss, and I really could only do planning in the evening when pretty much everybody was asleep. So like the role play was hard to maintain because, you know, we had so little time to actually discuss plans. We couldn't afford to slow it down eventually by, you know, getting into RP arguments. We just got into real arguments later on.
All right. So, what about on the French side? We don't really have the French commander-in-chief here, but I think we have some French players. I'm sure all of them were in the beginning of the game, though. But does anyone from the French side would like to explain what was going on the French side in terms of planning? What was the battle plan really? And how did you interpret the briefing? And did you have any problems? I think we have only John Darnitz here. Darnitz, do you have anything to add?
Sure. So initially the French plan was that we're going to do a two-pronged attack with the Lapierre's corps attacking of south around Limburg and Dietz, while the guard would attack passing over pontoon bridges at Nassau and attempting to outflank the coalition forces and pin them in the rear at Limburg. It seemed like for our main goals for this was to either destroy or hamper the coalition army so that they couldn't actually act as a vanguard for an invasion of France. So I'm not sure if we achieved that or not, but that was the objective. I would say in the early phases, there was a lot of argument about this plan. A lot of people were not very happy with splitting up the forces, but the Marshal said that this was the plan, so that's just what had to happen.
Yeah, I remember especially in the sort of the core, so the right wing, Perrier and I myself, we weren't keen on the plan, but supported it then eventually. And so the right wing's objective was basically to, if we could, reach the Lahn and develop a defensive position, but we weren't sure. The briefing told that the Prussians might come from the east, so we sort of suspected them coming in from this direction. Thus we wanted to have the 2nd Division cover it, but and also de la Perrière quite explicitly ordered daily reports from all divisions in the corps, which I think never really were sent, so we went in somewhat blindly with 2nd Division being in the van, and then 3rd Division wandering somewhere around here until we eventually got note that they were engaged by the enemy. We were quite surprised, I must say, that the Austrians had already crossed the Lahn and were fighting somewhere in this area here.
Yes, that was interesting. There was definitely communication was a problem for both sides, especially with the troops spread out over a considerable area. Also, commanders had different orders regarding the marching pace and the route of march. For example, the commander of the French 2nd Division, Command General of Division Bazaine, not sure how to pronounce French
Bazaine.
names. Bazin had ordered his troops to move along the highway road at a quite exhausting pace, which made it so that he was considerably faster in reaching the villages of Mensfelden and Nauheim in the north. Meanwhile, the rest of the French divisions of de la Perrier's corps had ordered their troops to march at a more softer pace, so they were ready if they had to be engaged. So that was interesting. In the west, meanwhile, we had Marshal Renaud's corps, which had the 4th Division and also Guard Division, the divisions of the Guard, marching in the west. Do we have any commanders who were there in the west? Emmanuel Davalli, you were here since the beginning of the game. Would you like to say anything about what's going on in the west in the initial stages? Well, before the game really even start, and were there any problems?
No, it was an eventful march. I think, at least at the beginning, the plan worked. There was no particular problem on our side.
Laurent Garnau, were you in the game since the beginning? I can't remember.
Yeah, from the start.
Alright, do you have anything to add? What was going on in the west in the initial stages of the game and the march to Nassau?
Well, we decided to go to Nassau at the beginning, as you can tell. It seemed we were having a lot of issues with the paths early on. Like I kept hearing reports that our equipment was always getting stuck. So that's why you'll see the whole division is so spread up, as we kept facing like almost weather issues. The cannons were getting stuck everywhere, so we made so little progress. I'm surprised 2nd Division was able to make so much progress. I think you were almost playing the game as if someone in front was destroying the path for the people behind, because I never had any issues with my cavalry, but everyone else was reporting sort of supply things. But yeah, we didn't really have any issues. We were going, I think, 2 different routes to Nassau. It was sort of just easy walking until we got to the destroyed bridge, and then it was very much more interesting.
Yes. Basically, what happened for the Marshal Renaud's corps in the west was that they were using, well, in the east, troops of, for example, the 2nd Division, the French side, were using this nice highway. All of Marshal Renaud's corps were using this small country road that was going through hills and especially forests, and there were tens of thousands of troops on this small little road, and it made it so the marching pace was quite slow, as the column was so long as well that it took few hours for the last troops in the column to even get moving, since it was simply so long stretched out on this small road. And also, there wasn't really an organized order of march in some cases, which created some confusion. And it also made it so that the road was at times even destroyed or damaged by the troops in the front, since these were only small country roads and they had thousands of soldiers and dozens of cannons moving along them. So that created quite a lot of differences and different thought in how to proceed in the French army. I'm not sure if I think they later proceeded to use different roads on the next test. Oh yeah, let's move on into the next turn, or maybe even a few turns later. I need to check what turn has anything especially interesting. Oh, this is
Can I
a...
ask one thing?
Yes.
Why is that one French thing so far ahead? Like
This French second division.
yeah.
Basically, they were marching at a forced march pace, and they were marching on this highway.
I see.
I think that was the thing. And they also started a bit ahead than the other French units.
I see.
And they were supposed to be the right wing lagging behind.
Yes. Yes, it was quite interesting how things turned out. Also, the marching distances. I can kind of go into the umpire's perspective. They were, excuse me, sort of fudged because I didn't really, or kind of, I guess that it made it more realistic, kind of, not having a clear way to calculate how long a unit was marching. I was basically eyeing at their orders and the situation, and I was saying like, oh, that seems fine. Now let's move on to the 3rd of November turn, afternoon of 3rd of November. So this is basically, I think this was the last, but this was the next day. So this is the second day of the game, I think. Oh, an interesting thing, one thing that really slowed units down was if they kept their baggage with them. So something that the 2nd Division of the French forces here had explicitly ordered was that their baggage should basically just fall behind as soon as they couldn't keep up.
I see.
So there were no extended breaks for the baggage forces. And something interesting that the 1st Division of de la Perrier's division did as well was they also ordered their division's baggage to move as a completely separate formation, a day's march behind the friendly troops, which was quite realistic, from what I've understood about Napoleon. So here we can see in the afternoon French troops stretch along the roads. If you see any brigade markers with this baggage train symbol on top, that means that that unit's baggage is over there. So it's only the baggage, not the unit itself. But if you see a large brigade block, that means the baggage is with them. But if you see a smaller brigade block, that means that it only has the fighting formation with them, but not the baggage. So you can see here Garnau's troops don't have their baggage with them there. It's something that I didn't really especially clarify. I only wrote it in like general at some point, which created some confusion, but I felt that most people figure it out eventually, and many players had ordered their troops to do that. So the French reached Nassau. I think the date is currently the afternoon of the 3rd of November. Garnau of the French cavalry here in the west. You were one of the French troops first to reach Nassau. Do you recall anything interesting that was near Nassau?
Yeah, I quite clearly remember that there was a fort there with some sort of group of people who said they were no longer part of the German Rhine states, some Nassauians. And,
Yes, that's...
You're good.
Yeah. No, you can go on if you have anything to add.
They looked like a pretty irregular bunch. Half of them didn't seem to have weapons, and they looked like they were just a bunch of people who got together and like, yeah, we don't like the German Rhine. Let's just go up here. Anyone got a gun? You got one? We can do one with every third guy or something.
Yeah, so there was a small Nassau garrison in the castle Nassau. Oh well, it was a medieval castle, so it was quite outdated. and there was a cool roleplay event where basically a captain leading the garrison, as you said, expressed that they were no longer part of the Confederation of the Rhine, and they were no longer allied with the emperor. To which the French proceeded to besiege the castle with guns, and they ordered the garrison to surrender in an hour before they would open fire. And the garrison did surrender. I think there were only a few hundred soldiers occupying the castle. Meanwhile, in the town of Nassau itself, the French troops stormed the palace of the governor of the town of Nassau, and I think he was also the acting leader of the Duchy of Nassau, since the Duke himself, as it turned out, had fled the duchy. And I think who stormed the palace was the Polish lancers of General Pustini, who unfortunately doesn't seem to be. Well, it wasn't really a storming of the palace. They were also besieged and were ordered to surrender, and they did surrender in only a small amount of time. So there was quite a lot of small roleplay stuff going around in Nassau this turn. And also, as you can see, there is no bridge connecting Nassau and Castle Nassau on the map. So what I had decided to do was that there was a destroyed bridge there, which the French forces could sort of repair. So what the French did, they had pontoon bridges, as did all sides on this game. Both the French and the coalition had pontoon bridges. So the pontooniers of the French army reinforced the destroyed Nassau bridge, and they also created a small pontoon bridge near it, which allowed the cavalry to cross. Meanwhile, for the French, not the French, but for the Russians, the Russian Cossack cavalry brigade was riding ahead of the rest of the Russian force, led by General O'Rourke himself. And General O'Rourke came into the village of Homburg, where he saw foreign troops. Unfortunately, the general here isn't himself, because I think it was quite a intense moment for him. Basically, the general was informed that they had sighted green-dressed cavalrymen with carbines in the village of Homburg, and his cavalry was maneuvering into combat. But as it turned out, these were Nassau infantrymen who had fled the town of Nassau on requisitioned horses, and they were not actually any kind of dragoons at all. And from these deserted Nassau troops, or retreated Nassau troops, General O'Rourke got some information about the situation in the town of Nassau, which basically said that the town of Nassau had been invaded by hundreds, if not thousands, of French cavalrymen across the bridge. And General O'Rourke would later go on to send some scouts to scout the situation in Nassau. But we'll come back to that later. Meanwhile, on the eastern front, the Prussian troops the coalition troops are moving along quite nicely. There were some, I think the Prussians had some confusion about where they should march or how, or actually command of the Prussians, and do you have anything to add what happened this turn, if you remember? Was there anything peculiar happening?
I think one of the things that really messed us up was the I timed out the marches for everybody, and those ended up being incorrect. I think the quality of the roads, I didn't realize how bad the road quality would be, and it really slowed us down by about a full day. We had intended to cross the Rhine, the Lahn, a day before we actually did. And that was one problem. And the other problem that we ran into was I think some of my cavalry ended up not scouting very well, and I had a division commander who went off and tried to organize the scouting, and it got a little messy, but it ultimately didn't impact us as heavily as I think the events of the next day did. The first day's marching was consequential in that it took us too long. We had intended to match the Lahn at the same time as the Russians did, and they ended up getting there much quicker than I think we did, or they ended up getting they ended up not getting to Nassau as quickly as I thought they would, and so this gave the French, who were much closer than we realized to Nassau, the opportunity to cross it, and we know what happens to the Russians afterwards.
And Austrian Commander, Your Excellency von Klenau, do you have anything to add? What was going on the Austrian Corps?
Not that much, I believe. I think a few units were somewhat slow, and I'm not sure if it was this turn or next turn that we noticed them in Linter. One of the two. But I saw it as somewhat of a win that we at least got across the lawn in like both places without being contested. I think we spotted some like vedettes in Limburg before we crossed, so we somewhat knew the French were in the area at least.
Yes, so as you saw from last turn, the French troops had arrived to the vicinity of the Lahn quite much faster than the coalition, and they had some cavalry scouts which had been in Limburg, and this was only a few squadrons worth. Meanwhile, the Austrian Uhlans of von Mežaros were marching ahead of the Austrian column, and von Mežaros, you are actually here, I think. I need to check on my phone. Yep. Do you have anything to add to this turn, really, from your point of view?
I mean, like, we didn't exactly know. We only knew that French hussars in the time. We didn't know exactly how much, so I needed to wait for like the rest of my squadrons to come up to cross in safety.
Yes, I remember you were quite spread out in the initial turns, scouting around. But yes, so the French hussars were able to ride away from Limburg in time until the Uhlans came to chase them. But basically, the Austrian cavalry was able to sight the French cavalry in Limburg, and I think this was the turn where there was first visual contact between the troops. Meanwhile, in Dietz, the French troops under command, not the French, sorry, the Austrian troops under command of General Adorian, who was leading this small contingent of von Gottesheim's infantry brigade, and an Austrian dragoon brigade was advancing, and there they met the Russian cavalry of General von Bistram, a cavalry commander, or a division commander, really, on the Russian side. And also there were some cool RP moments I want to describe. I want to mention to the players. I think the Austrian commander-in-chief von Klenau took a small marching break in Hadamar, and during that he got a nice tour of the local architecture. think there was a palace or a castle of some sort he got to see. And so did the troops in Dietz. They also got to see the local scenery. Basically, I had gone onto Google Maps as I was writing for each turn, and when I was saying if there was any period architecture that could add some flavor to the turns. For example, in Limburg there was some medieval wars here surrounding the town, and in Dietz there was another medieval castle, and there was also the palace where the Prince of Rhine, the Prince of the Netherlands, had resided once. So that was quite a magnificent place. And also for the French troops in Nassau, this was a kind of a big thing. They have been marching through country roads over forest and hills for a few days, and they finally got to see some modern civilization in the town of Nassau. That was kind of nice. Don't think there's anything else to add to this turn then, unless anyone has anything to say. Let's move on to the turn of 3rd of November, or I actually check if this is the same turn. This is indeed the same turn. One sec. I'm going to load another the next one. We're not going to go turn by turn, but I need to see if there was anything dramatic going on here in the beginning. Okay, there certainly is something dramatic going on here. So, in this turn, the 3rd of November morning. Sorry, I'm kind of reading this in a weird way. This was the morning of 4th of November, excuse me. So this is when we moved on to the normal turn cycle. So this basically the days are not every turn is one day, but it's instead multiple turns. And here in the west we have the Russian troops are organizing themselves into a battle formation to face the French troops in Nassau. And
moments before disaster.
Yeah, and I think I actually skipped a turn here. There was some scouting that had happened here, but this was the next morning of the last turn. And here in Dietz, the Austrian troops of General Adorin were moving to kind of cut the French line in two. The French forces did not know of their know about these Austrian troops here, of course. And here, in Limburg and Linter, the coalition troops had sided the French troops who had occupied Linter last evening, and the French troops had gotten, who were in Linter, had gotten reports of the increasing amount of coalition troops heading to Limburg and to Linter during the late evening, and during the night the French troops decided to retreat and reform on the Nauhamai hills. And also during the last evening the Prussian troops had marched from the north to Niederbrechen and they were largely undetected, I think. And this morning the Prussian and French scouts sight each other as the French troops are spreading their forces all around. And also this turn the French division led by de la Perriere arrives to Kirchberg. At least portions of it, as it seems like General Bertrand's brigade isn't here.
Yeah, there was some
over
very
to.
strange night marching going on.
Yes, basically there was I think there was a miscommunication or something in the De la Perriere's division, which made it so that General Marmonte had ordered his troops to begin marching at night, and then the French cavalry started chasing Marmonte's infantry or something to see what was going on, and basically they both ended up spending the night in the forest here. So they had been marching for some time already, and General Bertrand was the only one of the brigade, of the division, who actually followed the marching orders, and so he only began marching to Kirberg in the morning. That was interesting. So here in the west, what had happened, so this is the morning, and last turn was the evening. I think this is the second or third day of in-game time. Sorry, I can't actually remember now. But no real contact has happened yet. But basically, the Russian troops had sent some scouts to Nassau to see what was going on there, and a brave Russian Cossack corporal was able to cite that there were thousands, if not tens of thousands, of French troops marching across a bridge to Nassau. It was basically a big column he cited, pouring into Nassau, and this corporal returned back to General O'Rourke with this information. And also General O'Rourke had ordered a lot of other scouting to happen near Nassau, but unfortunately the French cavalry was too numerous in the area, as you had the Polish lancers of General Pustini and also the cuirassiers of General Marbot and the cavalry of General Garnau, who had split his cavalry into to scout the area. And they were making it really difficult for the Russian cavalry to scout, because the Russian cavalry had actually been, the cavalry brigade that was with this infantry had been split in two, meaning that there were only 3 Russian Cossack cavalry squadrons in comparison to the 3 whole brigades the French had in the area. So that created some problems for scouting in the Russian side. But still, the Russians had also the Russians cavalry that was in Hamburg last evening was chased out by the cavalry of General Pustini and portions of General Garnau's command, and they were basically pushed out of Hamburg in the evening after a small cavalry skirmish, and they were forced back to Welsch-Neuendorf, where the rest of the Russian army had arrived. But the Russian army still, after sighting these French troops, decided to embark on an offensive action. And I think we have a commander of the French, not the French, the Russian army here. So yes, okay, we have General Major Ivanov here, who was one of the Russian infantry commanders. So do you remember what was going on this turn?
So yeah, I think so. So, basically, I don't remember the reports of thousands, if not tens of thousands of troops never reached me. They might have been given to O'Rourke, but I was not aware that we were so badly outnumbered. Basically, our thought process was that we appeared to see the French marching along the road northeast. So what we wanted to do was to grab ground and essentially force them to attack us. So they would so that we would have the high ground, and they would be either forced to basically just let us sit along the route of march, or we could or force them to attack us. Obviously that didn't go well because we were much more heavily outnumbered than I thought.
Yes. All right. Thank you. And I forgot to mention this is the. Okay, never mind. I can't see clearly which date it is currently, due to my messy method of saving. It is. I think it's the 4th of November, and the first turn was 3rd of November, and the game before the game started was 2nd November. So this is basically the second day of the campaign. But yes, so as you heard from General Ivanov, there was some problems, it seemed like, with the Russian communications. Basically, the general or work of the Russian side basically had not really given all of the information he had gathered to his subordinates necessarily. As you heard, General Ivanov did not hear of these sightings of French troops pouring into Nassau.
Well, I did, but I didn't hear any number. Like, I didn't get like the sense of how outnumbered we were.
Yes.
I thought it was
what-
1 or 2 divisions at most.
Yes. Yes. So there was also, I really wanted to make the Russians kind of have difficulties really scouting the French French positions, and this was because the French, as this scouting was happening, the French troops were only arriving to Nassau. This is the morning of the next day, so this was happening last evening. So the French troops had not all moved to Nassau, so there weren't really that much to see. And also the French cavalry was heavily involved in the area. In the last evening, the Russian cavalry was pushed back from Hamburg. So basically all of the scouts were sent back, and they didn't really have any kind of cavalry screen happening anymore, which made it quite difficult for the cavalry to spot. And looks like I'm not sure if my internet is losing connection, because
No, that's just the TTS crashing.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, it's because I think on my PC I'm losing connection. I'm on my phone. Okay, I'm rehosting the TTS game, so Rankan can rejoin to stream the game to Discord. Sorry, but basically the French cavalry completely outnumbering the Russian troops made it quite difficult indeed for the Russians to really gain information about their opponent, and it seemed like to me that the Russians were perhaps maybe rushing into decisions. Also, don't mind that there's one unit that can be loaded in. It seems like because it's in local set. So yeah, basically it seemed like the Russians really wanted to take this forward position, as they have now taken. It is the morning of the it's the midday of 4th of November now, and the Russian troops have moved into position. Meanwhile, the French infantry has poured into Nassau, and the situation and the battle is about to unfold. So it seems like the General O'Rourke likely was rushing perhaps into his decision of taken the positions in Nassau and underestimated the French forces here. But he himself isn't here, so it's hard to say. And as you heard from Ivanov, the situation was very confusing and they didn't really have much information about the enemy. So,
Can we look
yes.
over at the other side of the map at this point too? I tried to load in the stream myself, but so by the Prussians at this point, I want to see because I think there was some other consequential stuff that happened over there. Yes, maybe not quite yet, but on this side we're setting up for the next battle, and I just wanted to give my perspective at this point and during the battle that the Russians had, being on the other side of the map from them, we were we could hear sounds of battle. I kind of sat on a hill expecting to fight the enemy. Yep, that's where I was, expecting that there would be a fight near the lawn, because we didn't really receive many scouting reports that implied anything other than forward scouts from the enemy, and we didn't get any concrete reports, or at least I didn't get any concrete reports that the enemy had deployed as in the position that we would end up fighting them in until later. And we could hear the sounds of fighting with the Russians, but I assumed that they were actually south of Nassau, because that's where they were supposed to have been by this point. So I was very surprised that that we never really understood what was happening there until I think it was like 2 days later when somebody, I think a survivor from the Russians, explained what happened. But I think one of our mistakes was that we didn't. I don't think there was any way we could have helped the Russians, especially since they attacked the French. But we didn't. We weren't able to put any kind of pressure onto the French until a day or so afterwards, because we didn't have. They were so far away, and I think Ninja had come over to my side of the line, so he was just as far from the Russians as I was at that point. So, yeah, I think it was pretty consequential that we just went a huge amount of time without knowing what was happening to the Russians.
Yes, so this turn was quite dramatic. Also, you can see in the center, General Adorin's troops have sighted some French troops here in the center. Actual General Adorin, do you want to tell what's happening in this situation currently?
Sure. So I'm scouting forward. I have no idea where the French are. Absolutely none. But I'm hoping for a good battle. I think I'm pretty confident. I've got a good set of infantry with lots of artillery and lots of cavalry. So I've got a nice flexible force. So I'm being bold, striking forwards to try and find out what the enemy is.
And this is actually perfect. Jay Puzzle, you were the commander of the French 3rd Division.
Yes.
Where are you currently, and what is happening? What was happening last?
So I'm way forward. I'm currently crossing the R, the right around Flacht. Because I realized that I needed a scouting mission, and I wanted to clear the path for Darnay's troops, who are the ones who are all the way at the back, fighting at Lichtenwald. So I'm currently just going forward to seize the area, and I don't realize that there is an infantry and another infantry division to my left. I managed to get like a really decent view, but at this point I'm receiving a number of dispatches who are not signed. I had heard sounds of battle before from like 2 different areas, both to the west. The first one was the battle towards against the Russians, and the second one was the battle of Lichtenwald. I don't know which one of the ones is the one that's happening. So so at that point, I think Darnay's is going to march up behind me, but in reality, he's fighting a rear guard action. By that point, I'm really far forward, and I get a perfect view, and for some reason, I don't send the. I don't have any idea that Darnay. I have an idea that Darnay is fighting, but I don't know it's him that's fighting. Because the dispatches are not signed. And second of all, I have a perfect view of the battlefield, and I realize, hang on a second, this is what's happening. And I'm pretty sure that I drew a map that was like, this is where the Austrians are. And looking here, it's almost exactly where the Austrians were. The problem with that is I didn't send that dispatch until like 12 hours later. I sent the dispatch on the morning of the 15th. This happened on the afternoon of the 14th. So there is kind of a problem here, which is essentially I spent by that point I'm really out of position. I have essentially Darnay essentially saved us from getting encircled at that point, just because I moved so far forward to scout the position, and I did not send the reports that would have made that scouting worthwhile anything. So it's why I'm really, really far forward on that battle. I'm not actually involved in that one.
Yeah, so you jumped ahead a bit since the currently, but yeah, that's what did happen and what happened in the next turn. So basically, at this point, the General Szymanowski is marching ahead with this cavalry. He has left at the worst possible moment because the Austrian troops are in the center, have reached the cavalry has reached the infantry of the rest of Szymanowski's division, who are being led by General John Darnitz. And yes, currently the rest of the the rest of the campaign players are hearing the first cannon shots here in the west of the Russian army, firing on the approaching French troops. But in Lichtenwald, there is no battle yet, so Szymanowski doesn't really hear any signs that there is a battle about to happen south of him either. So it's like perfect plunder, I guess. So now I guess we could look at the actual save of the Battle of Nassau real quick. I wonder if there is time to do that. Let's see. Nassau Empire module, there we go. Okay, I'm loading it now. By the way, I think Rankan needed to go AFK for a bit, so I don't know what the stream is looking at right now. So, and I hope he can actually see all these pieces, because as I said,
the pieces, but not the map.
Oh, okay. Well, that is a shame.
Rankin's stream is a pretty top-down view of it, so it should be...
Okay, yeah, okay, you can see it on the stream at least. So, yeah, so you can quickly see that the Russian troops have taken positions on the Hamburg Hills, and the French infantry has funneled into Nassau and is about to move over to attack the French positions. Not the French, sorry, the Russian positions. Also, in the north, you can see in the stream, in the direction of Welschneudorf, the portions of General Garnow's cavalry is with him there on the Russian flank, so that is even worse of a situation for the Russians. And you can see that the Russian core baggage is all gathered in the village of Kamenau. And what's going to happen now is that the French troops are going to start attacking the Russian positions, and they are also going to be trying to flank it from the east. And as the Russian generals at this moment are finally getting a full view of the situation in front of them, and they have basically underestimated the French army completely. As you can see, the line is quite short for the Russians, and they don't really have any kind of reserve line. And this is going to be quite important later when we move into the end state of this battle. And as you can see, the village of Hamburg is on fire as well. It was bombarded some cannonballs and some cannonballs and howitzer shells hit the village while it was being used as a front line by the screening Polish lancers of the French Guard cavalry, and it was set aflame as following this actions. And also quite interestingly, so this was a unofficial IKS campaign. This was not unofficial. This was not an IKS campaign. This was hosted on a separate Discord, and as such, I said no restrictions, which made it so that actual war crimes could be committed in Kriegsspiel, as horrifying that was. Basically, the Russian side had not given any orders to pillage the nearby area. But General Ivanov, do you remember what the orders that some of the Russian generals had given were? Do you remember some of the orders that the Russian generals had given when they were occupying the villages of Welsch-Neudorf and Obereld here in the north? While you were spending the night there.
I do not. They were given by brigade commanders. I did not see them.
All right. So some of the Russian commanders had ordered. They wanted the Russian commanders wanted their soldiers to be ready in the morning for a day's battle, as ready as possible. And as such, the Russian generals had ordered the local villagers to cook breakfast for all of the Russian brigades. So that was basically, in the eyes of the locals, seen as just pillaging, and there were some refugees who ran from Welsch-Neudorf to Nassau before the battle. So I thought that was quite interesting how the commanders didn't really order that the area should be really treated badly or anything, but they were ordering thousands of troops to cook breakfast for soldiers. So I interpret that as such for drama and for realism, as horrifying it was.
If they had asked me, I would have said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. I'll get money to pay for it," but whatever.
Yeah, seems like there was the soldiers were a bit out of control in that situation. And this is the end battle situation, end game situation for the battle. I wish I could stream on my PC, but I can't. But as you can see, the Russian line is no more. It was attacked from in the east by the approaching French troops of the Middle Guard, and the Russian troops were unable to reform their line and have now ended up in Baden's ends, where they are they basically failed in their last stand, and they weren't really ever able to recover from the initial breakthrough through their lines, because they just didn't have ample troops or ample cavalry to really support their withdrawal. Yes, to save time, I think let's move on to the next turn on the campaign map. Does anyone remember what happened after this battle exactly? Was anyone in Castle Nassau?
I think we lost the stream too.
Yeah. Also, sorry, Rankine's stream, Rankine's computer. I think my internet cut off again on my PC. This Amazing. So I'm gonna read also.
I know the first French officer I met was was UTF. And you took my parole and let me keep my sword, which, you know, everything went downhill from there.
No, my official statement on the matter is nothing happened. As per,
Game
as
must
per
be
our marshal.
posted, by the way, again. If Jan and whenever Rankin is back, I can reach him.
I'm sorry for your death in combat, Ivanov.
Oh, you shut up. You know exactly what happened. Tell the truth.
Sorry, sir. The umpire's talking. My bad. I interrupted. My bad.
No, it's fine. So, does everyone okay, so basically what happened after the Battle of Nassau was the Russian Russian commander-in-chief, General Ulrich, and the Russian division commander, General Ivanov, were captured by the French forces, and they were interrogated in the village of Nassau. Not the village of Nassau, the castle Nassau. They were brought to a meeting there, and it turned into an interrogation. And, well, General Ivanov, do you want to describe what was happening from your point of view?
Okay, so from my point of view, now Sam will probably tell it differently, but then again, the story seems to change every time Sam tells it. Essentially, basically, Sam, with absolutely no subtlety, was like, okay, I've captured you. Now you will tell me what your plan is. And I was like, no, I won't do that. That's stupid. And then he said, if you tell me the plan, I'll let you go. And I'm like, 1, I don't believe you. 2, what would that get me? I have no command to return to, you know? And so basically it became increasingly caustic, until, I think Sam just gave up, and then he had us, dragged out into a forest, and then, ordered us executed, which was attempted to be countermanded by some other French officers. He killed General Uruk, and then didn't seem to understand who he killed, because he told me, because after that he gave me one last chance, and I was like, no, you just and I was like, no, absolutely not. And then he's like, well, you know, maybe your corps commander will be, will tell me what's going on. And I'm like, I just watched you shoot him. And, uh, and then Sam attempted to kill me with his sword. I still had my sword, so I attempted to draw it in my defense. And then that's finally when the French soldiers killed me.
Yeah, so it was quite a dramatic and actual kind of comedic situation. The absolute chaos that was happening in the outskirts of Castle Nassau, as Marshal Renaud ordered a dozen French soldiers to take the Russian commanders and bring them back to the shore to the coast of the Lar, and basically executed them in cold blood. So
Seemed
that
like it was very much like a death of Stalin situation.
Yeah. So as I said, there were no restrictions. So unlike an official IKS game, there was some horrible actual violence here. But it was not without consequence. General Gar, now, you were in the French one of the brigade commanders in the French army when this happened in the west there, and you were also the general who captured General Ivanov yourself, and you if I remember you remember correctly, you promised to basically protect him as your prisoner, which, well, he died. So yeah. Do you remember that this had any consequences to the French army and how they thought of their marshal after he had killed two Russian generals in cold blood?
Well, it really had a long-reaching sort of effect on the army, but sort of the day after, while we were still in Nassau, you could sort of see it already started the split. My character was against it. Other characters were. I mean, everyone sort of figured out, because we were all sitting in this room and we heard the gunshots go off when they shot O'Rourke, and then a bunch of stuff happened in the field, which wasn't gunshots. But I believe James's character was starting to get a little disloyal. We had a division commander. I forget his name. He was another Jean. It was Portal's character. He was one of the people who attempted to step in, just like me and Jean Baptiste, who isn't here currently. He attempted to step in, and due to a bunch of him having disagreements with the corps commander, the marshal at the time, it ended up with him being demoted to being in charge of the baggage train.
Yeah. It was Henri Jean-Bonnet who was Portal's character. Him being demoted basically sets up probably the total and complete collapse of the army later.
I just want to say, I think it's funny you call him the corpse commander.
Yeah, I was gonna say that too.
Yeah. Literal corpse. Yeah, exactly. He's commanding the fucking dead man. Yes.
It's my IKS metal band, Corpse Commander.
Yeah. So it was nice to see that the drama this created in the French army, really. I think the general of the middle guard, Henry Jean Bernier, tried to, at this moment, actually desert the French army. But because he was so disgusted by the actions of the marshal. But he was basically the French marshal intervened when he was about to escape, quote unquote escape. He basically detected Henry walking alone on the streets of Nassau somewhat suspiciously. And also, something interesting that happened following this. Well, actually, I'll come back to that later. But basically, after the French army had beaten the Russian army at Nassau, and the French army had captured hundreds of Russian baggage trains. Some of the French commanders had ordered their troops to basically rest now, because they had won a battle, and this led to quite a lot of celebration amongst the French troops who had captured a lot of enemy baggage. And we'll come back to that later, what consequences that had in the evening. Now, in the center, as was mentioned described by General Adorian and General Szymanowski later, in the afternoon, the Battle of Lichtenwald is now about to ensue after the Battle of Nassau is over. So the Austrian infantry has moved into position and a battle is about to ensue. And meanwhile, General Szymanowski has moved even further away from his rest of his division, as he has no idea what's going on, and he now has an amazing view over the coalition deployment here in the north. General Bertrand, you were a French commander here, and I think you arrived with the rest of your division to the troops of the the French division. I can't remember, second French division here. So do you remember anything what was happening in this moment, or what the French army was thinking about?
Yeah, so as we've seen earlier, the second division was well ahead of where it was supposed to be, so it made the contact with the enemy first, was there in position, and the first division basically went in somewhat blindly. We didn't really know the whole picture. The second division was quite spread out, and so we had some sort of indications of Russian cavalry on the flanks and some infantry moving and stuff, but we didn't really know the amount of enemy troops in front of us. So the corps commander de la Perrière decided to deploy for battle, to attack what appeared to us to be just like a little sort of vanguard force. And we hoped and prayed and sent dozens of dispatches to the 3rd Division, which we hadn't gotten any report from whatsoever. We didn't know where they were, so we hoped they would come as they were supposed to, cross over here and sort of support this attack. Turned out that there were much more troops than we anticipated, and that this battle plan very quickly fell apart in the morning of the next day. And
Yes.
the server's down again.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, I wonder if I can real quick connect on my phone to this PC so I can get a better internet connection. So, yes, in that turn, there was actually, I think, some skirmishing happening as the as the coalition troops were putting up pressure on the French position. Oh, actually, can the coalition commanders describe to me what's happening in the east at that moment? Once I've loaded and I'm going to load the rehost game again with better internet, so you can kind of use that to describe the situation.
Do you want to talk about it, Ninja, or should I?
You can go first and I'll add anything you have.
So we, at this point, I wasn't close to the front lines. I wasn't aware that there was a significant French force of ours until around the evening, and when I personally rode up after my 3rd Division had crossed the lawn, and I discovered that Ninja had ordered one of his divisions to conduct a flanking march, and all of my cavalry to make a wide flanking march around the enemy. And it was about at this time that evening that we finally got word about the Russian situation. I don't think we learned that they were completely destroyed, but we knew they were in a battle of some kind of significant force, and I believe Ninja wanted to withdraw and back towards the lawn and see if there was some way we could support the Russians. And I argued pretty heavily against that. I felt that we had committed to the battle because my cavalry was well behind the enemy lines at that point, and his division was also very far ahead, and there was no way I felt like we would be able to get them back in time without them potentially being at risk. And I basically said I'm going to attack them no matter what. I'll attack them alone if I need to. And and then I presented a plan to Ninja that of an attack, and I think that finally convinced Ninja to move forward.
Yes.
I want to point out that the division at Dorian we had it wasn't really on a flanking march. That was just still him being down there from the very initial plan we had. Because I suppose he never we only knew about these troops a day before, and I guess that letter never arrived to him, or maybe I never sent it. I don't entirely recall. But it did mean that he was very far away from everything. We didn't know exactly where he was, of course.
At midday, you had ordered him to conduct a flanking attack against this French position.
Yeah. No, but the flanking attack was already heading back north, so
yeah,
that wouldn't have been too bad.
But I was like, I argued very strenuously for us to actually make the attack here because I didn't want the entirety of my cavalry to be behind enemy lines, and they had a scheduled attack at a position. And I knew there was no way we would be able to withdraw them before the time of that. Or I was worried
they were only to attack if they heard the sound of battle. So
I don't think they'd still be well behind enemy lines. They were supposed to attack around Niesbach. And as you can see, they were going to make a wide flanking march around by like Uffingen, and Dauborn and Niesbach, and maybe attack like Kerberg or Niesbach down here. We were aiming for the rear of their formation.
I think there was General Stroheim who was ordered to do a flanking march with the cavalry, and his cavalry is over there.
I think it was his idea, even.
Yeah. General Stroheim, you're here. Would you like to say anything?
I don't recall if it was my idea or if the Austrian general suggested it, but at the very least, we both agreed to it.
So yeah, at this time well, it's currently midday in this time, but the next evening, I think the coalition troops were ordered to start putting up pressure on the French positions. As you can see, General Nicole's brigade is already near Warschau, and I think there was a skirmish happening over the village. It was only skirmishing at this point, but was some fighting happening there in the east. But yeah, in the center, the Battle of Lichtenwald is about to ensue. I'm going to load up the save, and let's see if you can see anything in the save, Jan.
Sorry, what was that?
Yeah, actually, 1 second, I need to load save. There we go. There's so many saves I can't even remember which one is which. Okay, there we go. Here's one of the battle in full swing. Not sure if you can see this. Are all of the pieces working or not?
Looks good.
Okay. Oh, that finally something works. But Steam didn't destroy all of my saves. So, actual General Dorian, do you want to describe what happened in the Battle of Lichtenwald? Or actually, did he just quit the channel? That's a shame. Could have just described what happened in the battle at the best time. Alright, but basically the infantry led by Jen Darnitz had formed up on a road near the village of Lichtenwald, and the Austrian infantry led by General von Gatesheim was to attack the French infantry head on, while the cavalry of General O'Dorian was to basically support it. Unfortunately, though, due to the terrain of the battle being very heavy forest, the Austrian cavalry was not really able to be utilized to full effect, and as such, the battle did not go to the favor of the Austrians as much as they hoped. But the Austrians did have a lot of artillery, though, which did deal a lot of damage to the French lines. Now you can see here, I think this is the, it's 1 hour into the battle or something like that. The French have basically pushed the Austrians on their western flank quite nicely. I think this is going to lead into something interesting. Let me check if I have a turn where it shows what's about to happen. So this is 1615 turn. Okay, it doesn't really show that well what's happening. I'm gonna load into a next one. And basically what happened here was the thin extended French line was a bit too much, ended up being a bit too much here in the plains, and basically General Adorin was able to charge a regiment of French troops with his cavalry. And at this moment, as you can see, both sides are running quite low on ammunition and their men are exhausted. And the what? And the Austrian attack is losing steam. So basically, the battle goes on for several more turns, but the battle basically ends up being a victory for the French, as they are able to stop the Austrian attack, but they are also very bloodied after this forest battle. But luckily for General Szymanowski, this means the French infantry of the 3rd Division does not get destroyed while they are separated from the rest of their division and their corps. Now let's move on to the next turn. I think let's go to a morning turn, wherever there is a morning turn. So let's check out what this turn is all about. Okay, this is just the evening. So this is the evening of the same day, the evening of the 3rd of November, I think. So the Battle of Lichtenwald was fought in the afternoon, and the Battle of Nassau was fought at midday. And at this point, as you can see, the coalition troops are sending more troops to skirmish with the French forces, and they're basically trying their defenses in the evening. Now, General Bertrand, you were with the French commanders when this was happening in the east, and do you remember what you did late in the evening?
We pulled back our forces, I believe.
Yes.
To the heights here. I'm not completely mistaken. And wanted to have the enemy sort of lured onto our positions with the high ground and such, and then launch a counterattack with the reserve forces into their flank.
Also, by the way, General de la Perriere is here himself, by the way. So, General Perriere, if you anytime have anything to add, let us know. I do remember what's been happening lately these days, actually. Do you want to give your point of view since you were leading the Eastern Corps here? This is the afternoon of 3rd of November. there's skirmishing happening along the line. The coalition troops have sent some troops more forward, and you've heard the sounds of battle here in the west. And I think you've been with your division has been with the troops of the French 2nd Division for a few hours now. So what's going through your head?
Well, at this point, we're not sure of the size of the enemy force, although we suspect it's going to be larger than ours. We're falling back to a little more secure position, trying to follow the overall operational plan, which is we're supposed to be the anvil for the hammer. Unfortunately, at this point, I have no idea where the hammer is, or if it's going to be coming down. And it's right in this period, if I remember correctly, when I finally when I do get a dispatch from my 3rd Division, which I had not heard from up to this point, but I get a dispatch from them and giving their location somewhere up around where was it? Somewhere, I want to say it's around Flacht or somewhere in that vicinity.
Yeah, I mentioned I was around Nilheimer Hills by that point.
Yeah. And it's at that point when looking at what we think we know about the situation, that division is now very separated from the rest of the force, and with fighting going on in that area. And so my concern at that point becomes that they're going to become isolated and destroyed, and I'm going to lose that whole division, and I'm not going to be able to help them. And that's when we start working on the idea of counterattacking and intending to use his position on that left side to hopefully make some kind of junction with him. And if he can attack on that left side, he'll be coming in to the enemy's flank as we counterattack. However, that didn't quite go the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, we'll go to that later. Well, what's happening on the coalition side then? Do any of the coalition commanders want to speak out what's going on through their heads in the evening of 3rd of November?
Our plan in general was to attack the next morning, I believe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we assumed they would hold their positions because we judged them to be very strong. So
Yeah.
to foreshadow to the next morning, we were quite surprised when they had lost their positions.
Our plan was we had the Prussians kind of moving up here and along this hill up here, try and strike in as a loop, and then the rest of the coalition army would come in towards Nauheim, sort of as I've marked. And we would use these hills as kind of cover to make a large flanking attack and pressure these hills. We assumed he would cover the hills north and south of Niesbach, and we knew that you had supplies in Kerberg, so we ordered our cavalry to come in and attack those supplies, and we were hoping to destroy you completely. We thought you were some kind of holding force at this point, and that the we sort of had an understanding of what the French plan was at this point, which was that you were making some kind of hook around Nassau, and that the force in front of us was some kind of holding force. So I was pretty confident that the attack would be successful.
So I'm just looking for the new next turn now. Wherever it is. Well, we can just go straight to the battle since we have that. I think I had the setup. So yeah, basically, during the night and late evening, the French ordered their troops to fall back from the Nauheimer Heights and from the village of Warschau into this new location, like to reconsolidate their line and to launch an attack. But this was quite unfortunate timing for the French, as they lost the quite important Nauheimer Heights, which had in the updates made it so they had gotten more information about the enemy troops. Like, for example, they had been I think they had gotten reasonable information. Of course, they didn't know exact strength of the enemy. They were, instead of saying like there is a brigade of infantry there, I was writing there are thousands of infantrymen in this location, or you see a long line of troops approaching from the northwest, or you see in Lenter black line in the distance.
I think I had the best view. If I may, I kind of want to read the report because I'm on the other end of the battlefield, and I am on like the heights that really control that position, which are the Nauheimer Heights, which are way back. But I'm Szymanowski for context.
Where were you? Sorry.
This was before this turn, so he was still on these hills at Buchefeld.
Yeah. I was on the hills all the way on the other side. The way that he describes the entire thing on. Hold on. Yep. So hold on. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, afternoon of the 4th of November. Rows of long black lines are seen in the eastern horizon, southeast of Linter and northeast of the Nauheimer Hills. They stretch from the highway horizontally. A few hours later, scouts return with more observation. The enemy has multiple Ulan squadrons, a few hundred or so headed south of Mensold, and a few hundred others stayed to screen their infantry. The scouts were able to return with a good deal of information. The small village of Linter is infested with thousands of men. A sizable camp has been set up there containing Austrian grenadiers and Bavarian infantrymen. The line to south of it for your Skryglas and other infantry information. Definitely not an Austrian or French by the looks of the uniform. They're formed to oppose forces' position on the hills in Nauheimer, but are now oriented infantry to face your cavalry. They've stationed a formidable amount of men on a hill 1 kilometer northeast of you. Getting contact with the forces at Nauheimer has been difficult due to the few hundred Austrian Uhlans and Melsfeld. The scouts heard some small arms fire from the east, and then I got a dispatch from an unsigned dispatch explaining that there had been asking me to either attack a few Austrian cavalry brigades at Rudelsburg or withdrawing to Berghausen.
Yeah, so that was actually a turn before that. So and that turn I think the Austrian cavalry was in here in Mansfelden, and all of the German states were here in Linter. So it was slightly a different place. But yeah, so that was actually a pretty good way to show what the game updates were like. So the amount of information really varied what the players got relative to where they were and what they were doing. Now let's move on to the next turn, wherever it is, deep in my files.
One question, did we actually know that he was there? Because I don't think we did.
Yes, we did.
We did? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to screen against like 3 brigades of cavalry.
No, but you knew he was there during the battle, yeah. But not beforehand,
he left,
right?
I was assuming it was the cavalry of the force at Nauheim.
I can't really call what everyone saw as well. It could be that some people saw different things relative to where they were, but you do have all the channels opened up on the Discord now, so you can go check on the campaign Discord. Now let's move on to the site of battle actually now. So if I can find up the the Battle of Nauheim, which is about to ensue. I do wish my channels were not such a mess, because I'm having a lot of difficulties finding what's happening. There we go. Alright, so let me know what you can see. Yeah, actually I'm watching on my phone, and yeah, you cannot load up a lot of stuff, but you can actually see the map at least. Yeah. Okay, so this is in the first. This is where the Battle of Nauheim is already in full swing in this turn. So basically, in the morning, both sides had gotten a morning update on the strategic map before we moved into the battle itself. So both sides got basically general situation, to know the general situation of what they saw. So the coalition troops had moved troops along the Nauheim hills to take them, as the French had abandoned them in the morning, and the French were over here near Niesbach, I think. And the interesting thing about this battle was, how should I exactly resolve this? Because both sides had ordered themselves to attack. And that made it so that both sides kind of will walk directly into contact. So it was perhaps quite unexpected on both sides. So the French troops moved here to occupy the hills north of Niesbach, and also to attack here towards to the northwest. And they were met by quite a large amount of troops. Now, unfortunate for the French commanders, as they had withdrawn from the hills of Nauheim yesterday, they had missed some quite important things that had happened on the strategic map. And that was the Prussian forces had been reinforced by an entire division of grenadier infantry, which had arrived from the north straight into the battle. They had basically started marching before dawn, and had marched for some kilometers and arrived just in time for the battle. And also, I think His Excellency von Klenau received the Cuirassier Brigade of von Wibekins as well from Dietz, which also came to help out in the battle. Now in the west, you see that the cavalry of General Zizmanovsky is marching, and I wonder what's going to happen there. And here in the southeast, we have the cavalry of General Stroheim attacking the French rear. So let's briefly go over. Who wants to start? What went in this battle? Does anyone have any noteworthy observations or have anything what they want to say? I'm sure the French have at least something to say.
I do have one, but it's basically a separate action. You can think of Nauheim as two different actions. There is the action between there is the action between 1st and 2nd Division, and then there's the action of 3rd Division, who A is not in contact with N, and B is essentially in the Austrian rear. And I was in 3rd Division. Most of the battle was probing, seeing what was going on, eventually stumbling into the Austrian baggage train, lighting it aflame, and then withdrawing. I believe I burned a veritable boatload of supplies. Basically, most of the Austrian, basically burning and exhausting the Austrian supplies as far as possible. But in the meantime, I had no idea what was happening with 1st and 2nd Division, who are perhaps the more interesting story. And again, I kind of, if anyone is the person who probably deserves the most blame, blame for this section of the battlefield going this badly, it's probably me, despite achieving that much success. But that's the second part of the battle.
Alright, so does the rest of the French side, anyone want to say
Yeah, well,
anything?
to pick up from there, as Achilles wasn't able to attend the battle, I sort of took command of this position here. We were set up like this in the morning, like so, and then we had some reserves, I believe, almost the whole 2nd Division supposed to come up along here together with our cavalry to roll up this position here, which we knew of. Turned out that at the start of the battle, the Prussians basically already sat here and were able to overrun our positions, and the forces of the 2nd Division, which were supposed to outflank them, basically ran into this masked battery on the highway and got completely smashed. So once that became clear, and we even sent one of their brigades back to cover the supply train because we knew of the Prussian cavalry going around and got reports of them showing up at Oren. So yeah, we fought with only a fraction of the available troops, being completely overrun and surprised by the Prussians, who somehow managed to sneak up into musket range. That was the first screenshot I received, basically showed the Prussians right here in front of me. So we then tried to, whoever was able to still run, to pull back into this sort of position, and then started to relocate the supplies and fall back from this combat. So it basically all fell apart from the very first report we received in the battle.
Yeah, I would say, if you don't mind, that you can see by the situation there had been an opportunity, at least from our point of view and what we knew at the start. There had been an opportunity here. The 3rd Division, this is a fault of mine because I realized that they were separated. I had given them the message that we were going to be doing this. I was hoping that we could recover them, essentially to join with them here, and that they would be coming in from the west. And that western movement, I did not realize that all he had was his cavalry. I thought it was the whole division. And that western movement, in conjunction with our move on our left, looked like an opportunity. That, of course, that opportunity wasn't really there. It was a mirage. But yes, it was my fault because I did not have good contact with 3rd Division. I made an assumption here, which was a mistake, and I also made the assumption that with the noise of the battle, the sound of the guns, he's gonna head towards it, and he's gonna be coming in with 3rd Division on that side, and we were trying to get them back with the Corps, and it was intended to be a relatively limited assault. We weren't gonna try to penetrate deep, but we wanted to rejoin the Corps together and form a new line, basically where you see our 2 arrowheads on Jan's stream here.
So where you were the night before.
Yeah, exactly. We were trying to, but that turnaround, I had ordered or we started to pull back under a different set of circumstances, and then I realized, we need to get forward to try to merge with 3rd Division, and so we need to go forward. And I also thought, well, this actually presents an opportunity because our falling back, we might draw you further towards us, which would leave your rear and flank more exposed to 3rd Division when they come in.
Which was correctly what happened, which is why I burned the supplies. But the issue was I didn't realize I didn't have enough force. I had a cavalry brigade. I did one of the things that I should have specified in the. I mentioned that second and third had taken severe casualties at the Battle of Lichtenwald. So but what I didn't send in my dispatch, the first dispatch that I actually sent, was that there were a bunch of Austrians of just like coalition troops all over the field, just way too many. And had I specified what I had actually seen, I don't think you would have called the attack.
Now, if I may, to give some coalition input here.
Yes.
I am a little confused why we had no idea that the French were on our left, but the French knew we were on their right. That, I don't know. That didn't make sense to me at the time.
Well, what happened was essentially you have two separate columns. The entire thing split into two sectors.
Yes, I do understand what happened. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we had a flanking force of cavalry as well, and you guys knew it was there.
Yeah,
Are you talking about the ones on our far right?
Yeah, we had forces here who were observing their movement.
Yeah, we had.
Yeah, but obviously we also had forces that saw. Like if he saw our forces, we would have seen him at some time, and we just simply didn't know he was there at all.
Yeah, that I don't know. I just know that our initial observations, even long before this, what was it, 2 days before, when we first made contact, we already had information that you had guys. Either it was 2 days before, or the day after that, we had information that you had guys moving southeast around the what is it,
Brechen.
Yeah, Oberrechen.
I mean, it makes sense that you guys would have that if you're up there. I'm not disputing that. I'm saying it didn't make sense to me that he could see all our forces and we couldn't see him.
Well, we didn't see all your forces, or we
no. I'm talking about the cheap No, but I mean the trivial mistake we made is we used too many forces in the attack. There was no reason for this. Like if you look at Nauheim right now, it's fell to the brink with too many troops.
Well,
we could have easily used the whole militia division.
This was not a mistake.
Of course, it's a mistake. They didn't fight at all. What are you talking about?
So the reason I say that. The French were so completely overwhelmed in this sector that the Southern Corps was essentially a non-entity.
Yes, but the militia didn't fight in this battle.
So I can.
It was just there, stuck in a traffic jam.
Our initial plan, and the reason we dedicated so many forces to this, is because we assumed we were going to be fighting French forces on the top of hills in a really strong defensive position. We thought we were going to have to overwhelm this enemy force, which we assumed was 1 or 2 divisions worth. And I think when we were planning this battle, we didn't plan it with the assumption that they would move forward into attacking range. We thought we were going to have to force
they stayed on the hills. We simply didn't have enough front line for all the units. Look at how many troops are around Nauheim. Those don't have any space as soon as the troops on the left close up.
I've mentioned this before in some private discussions, but I think our plan was, and I'm having trouble, I can't see the map, but we were hoping, I think this is knees back where I'm kind of got my cursor over right now. And we assumed that we would be fighting a line here, and that our attack would come here and here.
Yeah, but even then, I just think we can, at least the militia could have very easily been kept as
well. Yeah, I mean,
at least they scared the hell out of us.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately this was a successful attack for us. We smashed a portion of the French army after the French army smashed a portion of
I agree. I'm just saying the mistake we made was using the militia in the attack instead of as a reserve / guard for our flank.
Yeah, I mean,
because they quite simply didn't participate in the attack.
We didn't consider protecting our supplies. That was a problem with all of our planning, is we didn't consider the supply trains.
And at this point, very funny, I think this very next turn, we charged with the cuirassiers into that infantry right there and just smashed the whole brigade.
Yeah,
on the
I
left.
think
So that was fun.
I think you received a report of like. Do you remember what kind of what you saw through your
We just
spyglass?
smashed them all up and chopped off their heads, things like that.
Yeah, there
We
was
killed the
some
brigade
reports.
commander as well.
Yeah, there was some interesting reports in this game that some cuirassiers had been beheaded. Some
One of
French
the
troops.
major problems that I saw in the battle is for us during the game, the Württembergians and Bavarians were under the same commander, which led to them following the same objectives, which they were not supposed to do in the initial planning. They had different things to do. But the Württembergians marched down the road and saw the French in front of them. Were like, well, let me get help by the Bavarians. And then they were cutting south to cut off the whole thing, and that didn't work out at all because they were instead committed.
So here's the end game of the battle then. So as you can see, the French are retreating, but the coalition baggage has been set ablaze by the cavalry of General Szymanowski, so that has been able to stall the coalition attack as troops are basically running back to try to save some of their baggage, and they are losing motivation to push on in this circumstance. And the French are retreating as fast as they can. And also, by the way, the Austrian cavalry of von Mejaros had sighted the cavalry of the French forces on the strategic map prior to the battle. If you look on the Discord's player channels, but there was seemingly some communication problems as His Excellency von Klenau had not received that information from his subordinate. But that's just something I want to point out, so that's not relevant. So I wrote some Wikipedia articles about each one of the battles, so I'm gonna go real quick and read the casualty numbers and strength numbers of this battle. So I posted them in the chat, and you can also see them in the campaign Discord. So in this battle, the coalition forces had 45,000 to 60,000 soldiers and 42 guns, while the French had 17,500 to 23,000 men and 12 guns. So as you can see, it was a surprise that the French didn't get totally smashed in this battle. So it was good that they were able to retreat with some of their force intact. The casualties were 500 to 1,200 for the coalition, and hundreds of wagons lost, which we can see here. So relatively low combat losses. And for the French, it was 3,000 to 5,000 casualties, of which 1,500 were captured and 8 guns were lost, and small amount of wagons were captured. So basically, the French lost quite a few men as they were in the charge of the Austrian infantry. So they were encircled and captured, and also they likely lost a few men missing, as well as some of these inexperienced. There was quite a few inexperienced conscript making up the French army who likely deserted after this battle. And also, rest in peace, General De La Yaute, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he fought in the last stand of the French side and met his fate. And now let's go back to the strategic map. By the way, since Renkan can actually see the strategic map coalition pieces as well, he can stream, and he's back now, he can stream the coalition map, and you can then look from his stream and you can actually see all of the pieces. Now I need to just find out which turn is which. Let's test out this one. Okay, well this is actually the this is when the battle is just about to begin, I think. So that's not the correct one. But there you can see what it looked like on the coalition, on the map mode. You can see the Prussian grenadiers marching in there. And you can also see the infantry of General Dietz starting to move around there in the southwest. Let's test out this one. Oh, well, this is the exact same one, so let me not use the same one. So that was the 4th of November. Now it's the 5th of November. Alright. So it's the 5th of November. Oh, whoa. Is this actually the next day? Because a lot has happened.
Looks about right.
Yeah, sure, let's go with this. So, I think we skipped quite a lot of time here. Maybe a full day or something. No, actually no. The French were, so what had been happening here? So, it's now been, the Battle of Nauheim was fought some hours ago, maybe around 6 hours ago. It's now afternoon, and it began at dawn basically, or in the morning, maybe 4 hours or something like that. And the Battle of Lichtenwald was fought yesterday afternoon, and the Battle of Nassau was fought yesterday midday. Now it's been a while since we talked about the corps of Marshal Renaud, and there were some plans for a night march on the French side for Marshal Renaud's corps. Does anyone who was a commander in the French corps remember what happened in the evening, and how did the night march go for the French army in the west?
I was there, but I didn't really take part in the craziness of the night march, so if someone was there, they could probably explain it better, but I did get a report of what happened a little bit.
General Garnard was marching ahead of the troops. I'm not sure if General Leclerc was in the game at this point yet, so I likely can't say about that. But yeah, so I'll just go over. So, as I had said, the French troops, after winning the Battle of Nassau, they had started resting and celebrating after the battle, and they had captured all of the Russian baggage, and of course the baggage contained some beverages among other goodies. And basically, large numbers of the French army had gotten drunk and disordered after the battle, as one does after winning a significant victory. And then the French army decided to kind of turn their orders around at the command of Marshal Martin Renaud to begin conducting a night march to the east, likely after hearing the signs of battle in Lichtenwald. He wanted to get his men moving again. So what happened is that the French army took many hours to actually organize their men back up after being disorganized in the celebration of the battle, after the Battle of Nassau, and they then began marching, I think at midnight, quite late after the planned start date of the night march into the east. And what happened was that the troops of the Russian cavalry of General Otto von Bistram had been ordered to, before the Battle of Nassau had started, they had been ordered to join the battle on the side of the Russians, of course, but they arrived quite late to the battle. But what meant that in the evening, the the troops of the Russian cavalry had arrived quite close to Nassau itself, so they had arrived quite delayed, and they had also come across some deserters of their battle in the aftermath of the Battle of Nassau. And what happened is that the French corps during the night started marching east, and they quickly came across the Russian cavalry hiding in the woods east of Nassau, and a night skirmish started, and basically the French night march was not able to really make much progress at all, and most troops spent the night frustrated in standing in formations or waiting to continue the march, or some troops, like the troops of the Old Guard, were ordered by the troops just to sleep the night in Nassau, disobeying the orders of the marshal. Now, in the morning then, as the Battle of Nauheim was happening, the French troops, as the sun came up, were able to push out the Russian skirmishing cavalry out of the woods, and then a big chase began, basically. The Russian cavalry started marching from Nassau as quickly as they could, as they heard that they were facing tens of thousands of Frenchmen, or something like that. And in the process, the Russian cavalry left behind a lot of its baggage to make their retreat faster, and they also completely exhausted their men. Now I think it's around midday or afternoon, and the French troops who had been ordered to march to Dietz to the east and were chasing the Russian cavalry or trailing them, were able to get to the town of Dietz itself. The Russian cavalry had been ordered by the commander general, actually it was Adam Otto von Bistram, to basically blow up the bridge near Dietz, but they were unable to do so as they had abandoned a lot of their engineering equipment on the retreat, and they were also in quite a lot of disorder. Instead, the Russian cavalrymen attempted to build a barricade on the bridge, which the French artillery proceeded to just bring up their guns and blow up. And they were able to blow up the barricade without damaging the bridge itself, of course. It was quite a sturdy bridge, and they were, of course, well-trained artillery officers. And then the French infantry continued their march to Dietz itself. And the Russian cavalry fought a delaying action in Dietz, basically skirmishing with the advancing French forces and trying to slow them down, and they were eventually pushed back to Freien Dietz. And I think as the coalition, as the French fired their cannon shots near Dietz to destroy the barricade, I think the coalition heard that and started forming up their men. So the coalition right now has lost a lot of the Austrian and the Bavarian and the Württembergian troops have lost their baggage. So, and I think that created a lot of, as they had fought in the Battle of Nauheim and lost their baggage there. And I think there was some disorder happening in the coalition army. So, coalition commanders, would you be so kind to tell us what was happening after the Battle of Nauheim?
So we were pretty disheartened, pretty demoralized by the loss of the baggage train, the Austrian campaign supplies, and that of the campaign supplies of the two German minor states. I personally misunderstood the scope of the problem. I thought they were, I didn't think they had ammo. I didn't think they had the ability to continue the campaign. And at this point, Ninja and I were both considering withdrawing completely from the campaign. We believe that with the lack of the Austrian supplies, and then we, around this time, also received news that the Russians had been completely destroyed, which we found incredible because we, you know, in the worst scenarios of them fighting the French army, I never assumed that they would lose the whole corps. So we were, the way that I was looking at the problem was, it's really only the Prussian corps against probably 2 French corps at this point. So we were withdrawing to the north towards Limburg, and at which point we received word from the the Russian cavalry who was around Dietz, and they informed us that they had been chased by French. And I think it was around this time that the decision was made, and I think Ninja's completely muted, but there was 2 arguments, and one of the arguments was we can move towards Dietz and Limburg and try and assist the Russians, or we can withdraw further east towards like Runkel and Vilmar and just withdraw from the campaign completely. And I think I forget the exact reasoning of what we decided, but I argued for supporting the Russians because I felt that they were engaged and we needed to support them so that we could defend this position a little bit better. And it's hard to remember because we made several plans at this point, and several of them were kind of canceled as we gained more information about the French forces in this area. So I think simply at this point we were just moving towards the Russians.
All right. Do the rest of the coalition commanders have anything to say?
I think
Yep.
Ninja's completely deafened, so I don't know if he's...
Yeah, I sent him a message. Yeah, I think he's AFK, unfortunately. Let's go over to the French. The generals of the de la Perriere's corps, you had just lost a battle, or at least it seemed like a loss from many soldiers. What was happening through your minds? What was the overall situation of your corps and your troops?
Oh man, alive. By the time that we got there, we knew our strategic situation, which was we fought 2 battles. We fought the one Lichtenwald, and we suffered significant losses. We fought the one at Nauheim, and we suffered massive losses. The only saving grace that we had was that we realized, the Imperial Guard has to arrive at some point. But right now, the coalition is probably not going to attack us because of the burn supplies. We felt we could probably just hold at that point. We did initially consider hey, let's launch another attack. They are extremely vulnerable. They can't commit forces again because, they have... we literally just burned all of their supplies, but we did not have... We looked at our own forces then and said, no, we can't do that. So the mood was not great. We felt we were combat ineffective, essentially. That we could not significantly contribute to the force, to the fight. De la Perriere, Bertrand, anyone? So Jan, Achilles, any comments?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I'm remembering the timeline, which is a little fuzzy in my head at this point, but there was we were reorganizing, trying to get ourselves back together again, figure out just exactly what we had available, and then what we were capable of. Where we fell back to, though, there was an isolated, I believe it was Austrian, formation in a town that was very close to us.
Yes,
and
that was the force coming from Lichtenwald.
And that that presented a potential opportunity because, in my thinking, overall, the force was very demoralized and badly beat up. But if we could pull off even a small victory, it would be a sort of Washington against the Hessians kind of thing. We could regain the morale with a win, and that isolated unit presented an opportunity. So we did have a plan for trying to take it out, and unfortunately, we were unable to do it immediately because our forces were still recovering. And so we were going to try to do it I believe it was the next morning, and unfortunately they buggered off before we got a chance to do it. But yeah, that's essentially where we were at, and we were hoping for some kind of word from the rest of the army. Where were they? What were they doing? And we needed them to start coming down from the north. But we still at this point had no idea where they were or what their status was. So yeah, that's kind of where we were at that point.
Anything else from anyone?
Jan, do you have anything?
No, I think you hit the nail there.
So, I would actually like to read one of the update texts real quick. In the aftermath of the Battle of Nauheim, the French army's morale was kind of, the state of the French army was going quite badly in the case of de la Perrier's corps. So I'm going to read a part of this longer update. So, the French corps regroups at the Aar River. The men cry, curse, and scream. A young conscript, likely the last fusilier of his regiment, sobs, "Why me?" This all is in great contrast to the arrival of the Guards of Honor brigades, who pompously and in good order march to rejoin the rest of the corps, claiming that they have burned down hundreds of wagons and have humiliated Austrian uhlans. In addition, the infantry of the 3rd Division is reunited with the 1st and the 2nd. Its lines seem much thinner, and many of its wagons contain wounded fusiliers. Your aide-de-camps report to the current state of your forces. So yeah, that was only a small portion of the updates, and you can see the rest of them in the campaign Discord. That was only a small part of the aftermath of the battle, which I quite liked writing to really kind of emphasize the bloodiness of warfare. But yeah, now let's move on to the next turn. And so this was the midday of 5th of November, I think. So let's move on to the... No, excuse me, this was the afternoon of 5th of November, and this is the evening of the 5th of November. So, where do we even begin? So, well, let's start with the French troops on the French troops of the Marshal Renaud's corps. General Jean-Baptiste Leclerc, are you here? I don't think he's here, unfortunately. But General Garner, you were, I think, you were still with the French army at this time, definitely. So, what was going on at this moment?
I would like to at least he sent Leclerc sent a message in the lobby chat.
Oh, okay, he can't. He doesn't have a mic, unfortunately.
Yes.
Okay.
He just can't talk. I was with him for most of the fight. So
Yeah.
I
This
work
is,
pretty
we are
close with
talking
him.
about the we're not in the battle yet, so this is just the
Yes.
evening
Correct.
maneuvers.
So we're talking about the evening maneuvers out northwest.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a chaos. What we sort of had a couple fronts that we did. So had received reports that there was I had been sent to Limburg before we even saw enemies, and we started receiving reports a large group of Prussians were sort of advancing to us. So the 4th Corps and I think some of the Middle Guard were sent to Limburg. Not Corps. What I forget the names of all these things. The 4th and the middle were sent over to Limburg, and we were sort of setting up around the other half of us was setting up around the city. This is the Marshal Corps was setting up around the city to the Dietz, I believe, to the west there. And so setting up the battle, we didn't really over the night we weren't set up where we were going to fight, which I think you'll see has a really big effect when we get into the battlefield, other than the forces in Limburg. So all of our cannons were taken away from Limburg, which I think anyone who was part of assault will notice that they received no counterfire when they were bombarding them for what seemed like hours because of preparations for a grand battery that I believe the success of which will be seen by the Empire can describe. Also, another fact I want to mention is only one individual had the ability to communicate between the two parties live, which was Jean-Baptiste. Everyone else we had to sort of almost do our own plans or hand orders off between the two in this sort of evening period. So these two armies weren't one army at a time. Well, I'm making assumptions that the coalition, no matter that there are a bunch of different factions, were able to plan a lot easier together and could see sort of the thing. So it was an interesting situation. But in the northwest here, we had sort of two main spots that we planned in the evening, which was the city on the bottom left of Dietz and the city on the top left of Limburg. And we sort of had almost an empty, it was described over the night by Otto as a sort of no man's land developed after that turn, where no one seemed to control the sort of hilltops we had in the area right there. So it was very interesting. There was a lot of confusion, and I think the battle sort of this preparation phase had a huge effect on how the battle went, and at least in our front. And you'll notice there's a huge gap between the two armies, even though we're about to fight the same battle, which maybe against a smaller opponent would have a different outcome.
Anything else from the French side, from De La Perriere's corps? Alright, okay. Let's move on to the De La Perriere's corps was basically actually this is a bit of I think this is the morning turn already, so the infantry would still be over here in the back, I think, and they were only marching into battle at this moment. Meanwhile, the cavalry had moved ahead. So yeah, let's move on to the coalition. So what was happening? What had happened after you had? We also already talked about the aftermath of the Battle of Nauheim. When you came in touch with the Russian cavalry that had fled from Freiendies, what happened and what was your thinking process leading up to the Battle of Dietz?
So at this point, we had kind of gotten the supply situation underhand. I had shared Prussian supplies. I was like, there was a bit of chaos initially, but then we fixed it. And then we started seeing French units coming in at Dietz and Limburg, and we knew that there was an enemy force moving up at us from the south. And we weren't sure if the enemy had used pontoon bridges to get additional forces across the lawn, because we knew they had access to them. But at this point, as you can see by our deployment, we I'll have to admit, at this point, I realized that the enemy commander was Sam Miller, and I kind of kicked myself for not realizing he would make a big hook somewhere sooner. and I said, my thinking was the enemy has just won a big victory at Nassau. They've smashed a whole corps. If we can put ourselves in a defensive position where we have use of internal lines and these really excellent hills, I think we can bait them into attacking us here and getting their decisive victory that they need. We knew that they would attack us from probably Dietz and Limburg, and probably in the south. So we chose the R River as one defensive line, and then another defensive line on those hills, which I can't read the name of at this point.
It's Buchenwald.
Yeah, the Buchenwald Hills. We pretty much put all the Prussians up there with the Austrian heavy cav. We formed a Grand Battery, which was Ninja's idea, and then on those hills, and then we had kind of our less organized troops. We put the Landwehr in the south, we put the German miners, and we put the Russians in the south, and these were all of our forces that were kind of beat up or demoralized in one way or the other, or just militia, because we knew that the enemy forces to the south were the ones we just fought. And whether or not they had been reinforced at that point, we knew they were pretty beat up. So we felt pretty safe. And we thought that as the situation developed, it became clear that the elite of the French were in Dietz. So we knew that there was the old guard, some kind of guard, some Marines. So we knew that they were going to attack us there. So we put the best that we had on that hill there. And I didn't actually get to see how this battle developed, but from the aftermath, it seemed like it worked pretty well.
All right, let's move on to the battle itself. So this was basically this is what positions the troops were in the beginning of the battle, and here is the battle module itself. Oh, nice! Ninja is back again. He was His Excellency Flunken now of the
Is there a reason no
Austrian
one is
forces.
streaming anything?
Brinken is streaming.
Oh, I thought he was still disconnected.
Yep.
Never mind.
Yep. So this is it's currently dawn at this beginning phase of the battle. The French troops were ordered their orders were to begin marching at dawn from Hohenstetten to the positions from where they were going to attack the enemy. So they have not quite reached their positions at first. This was also the biggest live game I've ever hosted with 24 players, so it was an experience. And in the center we can see that the middle guard division is in position with the infantry in Friandies, and you also have the old guard itself with the Grand Battery in front of it, moving towards the old guard hill. And you see the coalition Grand Battery has opened fire with the Prussian Grenadiers in the front, and you have the French 4th Division in the north occupying Limburg with a line of Prussian regular infantry facing them, and a lot more Austrian troops in reserve. You can see that some of these are the troops of General Adorien and von Gottesheim, who fought at the Battle of Lichtenwald. As you can see, some of them are at a reduced state as they had took losses in the Battle of Lichtenwald. And same you can say for the French army. As Delaperrier's corps, you can see that some of the troops that fought in the Battle of Lichtenwald, like this whole division is only 4 battalions strong. Whole division, this whole brigade. One of Jean Darnett's, that was the whole regiment in the Battle of Lichtenwald, has only 4 battalions left at this moment. But still the French army is marching into battle. The Bavarians as well have not reached their positions on the Platte quite yet, so there's going to be a battle over that. And they are mostly the reserve Prussian Landwehr and reserve infantry units holding the Aar River with Württembergian regulars covering them. And you as well have the combined cavalry of General Szymanowski's and cuirassiers of General Leclerc's cavalry near Vlacht. So let's start breaking down what happened in the Battle of Dietz. Well, who wants to begin, really?
I can point out our general plan, perhaps.
Sure, go ahead.
We knew pretty much what was in the north, I think, more or less, and where everything was. Up to, like, here. I don't have a color. Up to here. Well, that's the northern part, yeah, this part.
Yeah.
But then down here, we knew there was cavalry, but we didn't really, we weren't too scared of the cavalry across the river, at least. And then the plan was to hold pretty much where we are, but also in the south at the Platte here, which sadly did not work out because apparently the Bavarians hadn't made it yet. We knew the guard was up here, so we had, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 batteries of artillery up there, which worked out well for us. And yeah, that was the initial plan, at least. We also, on the first turn, got news that they were going up here in the very south, because you had some of Dietz stationed around. So that was good to know. The reserves were mostly concentrated in the north, so it was very good that we knew about that from the very start. So we, like, first turn, I already ordered a Dorian's whole division down there.
Alright, so I'll just start going through if no one wants to give any thoughts before the battle, before the first shots were fired. I'll just start going through what happened in the battle. So the French infantry in Friendlies, the middle guard and the guard itself, were basically preparing to assault the coalition positions, it seemed like. The French had also organized their own Grand Battery there, and important for the Grand Battery was to, of course, get in position and fire on the coalition positions on the Bucherfeld hills. They had quite a commanding position, the coalition, on these tall hills, and I made it so that the French could not fire their guns straight at the coalition positions, and they would need to occupy this unmanned hill on the zone called No Man's Land. So the French troops began a quick dash for this hill. This was quite the French were able to move somewhat behind the hill, so they were in cover, and then they were able to set up their guns with the old guard itself covering the positions of the artillery as they started pounding the coalition positions. This was all not done without any hassle, since the French commander Marshal Renaud likely saw that the enemy artillery was pounding at his positions with strength that he thought was quite concerning, and he as such ordered the cavalry of the horse grenadiers of the old guard and the lancers of the Imperial Guard to charge at the enemy positions to buy time, seemed like, or storm the enemy positions. while his artillery set up. And this was quite a costly affair. The French lost, the Polish lancers lost a few squadrons at least. But thankfully they were, as the artillery was mostly targeting the enemy the French infantry and the approaching French artillery, the French cavalry was not completely destroyed at all by any means, but it was absolutely exhausted for some time. Meanwhile, in the south, the infantry of the French First Division was advancing towards Minsfelden and towards the hill at Dietz, and engagement ensued in this area. And the French cavalry as well started attacking here at Flacht, and I think actually General Szymanowski, you were leading the French cavalry, I think, here in the south, so with General Leclerc, so would you describe?
The battle, actually, this section of the battle was slightly bit more interesting than just that. One of the things that was happening during this section was, not only was I engaging forces directly, first, the Prussians automatically get out of position and they take one of the villages, I forget which. But the forces, me, Leclerc, and Darnay. Darnay's to my right, Leclerc's to my left. I am down the center, and I'm in overall command. So I send Leclerc to the right. They cross the river around Flach, and eventually, when the forces are retreating, me and the rest of Leclerc's forces commit. The end result is that there is now a Prussian brigade trapped and basically completely ineffective for the rest of the fight. And we begin rushing up the hills to see if we can stop anything that's going on. Unfortunately, we get completely overrun by. We don't get overrun, but we get fought back by Prussian units who arrive roughly and push us out of the hills. So I withdraw. And I get a message from Bertrand and de la Perrière that they are currently under attack. And they've essentially been completely dislodged. So I bring my cavalry all the way back, and at the end, it's Darnay who's nearly being overrun because he's taking severe casualties. Bertrand, who's also being overrun, and then I arrive with basically half a brigade or so of cavalry to just stabilize the line in that area. But the end result was that this side of the front, we accomplished a whole lot of nothing. We had a lot of Shakespeare had a lot of sound and fury signifying nothing during this section. So it was both not an easy fight and one that was just kind of destructive for us. So
yes, kind of difficult to cover this battle since so much happened and I wasn't really able to go through everything here. Basically, in the very east at Minsfelden, the infantry of General and the dragoons of General Bertrand attacked the village of Minsfelden, which was being covered by the remnants of the Russian cavalry. Three whole squadrons, I think it was, or something like that was left of the Russian cavalry brigade. And the Russian cavalry brigade was basically destroyed in this attack. In the center, the Old Guard manning the hill, which became known as the Old Guard Hill, was attacked repeatedly by Austrian grenadiers and cuirassiers. And, General Your Excellency von Klenau, do you want to go over what was happening there in the north?
I wasn't there for all of it, but Our reasoning at the time was that our artillery was starting to take some hits, and we didn't want it to lose. So we used the cuirassiers and most of the grenadiers to charge through the smoke that was kicked up by the bombardment, and to charge into the flank of the artillery, which we succeeded very much at doing, I would say. Sadly, we didn't coordinate too well with our northern Prussian flank, which meant a lot of the grenadiers were on guard duty in that direction, but it still ended up working quite well, I think.
General or Colonel von Mejaros, is it correct that you were leading some of the troops in the charge on the Old God Hill?
Yes, so I was originally taking command of the Cuirassier Brigade because my own troops were guarding French prisoners. And what happened basically is that I saw the basic employment of the Cuirassiers, and I thought they were not needed to protect the artillery because they could protect themselves, especially with all those grenadiers, right? So I concentrated the cavalry on the flank of the formation to anchor it, because we saw a lot of French cavalry and maneuvering in that area. And when Claire came up to inspect the position, we agreed that an attack on the Grand Battery is the best move we could make. And he gave me command of the Grenadier Brigade to carry out the attack. And then, of course, charging through the battery smoke.
Yeah, the fighting was quite thick in the Old Guard Hill. Well, it was also south of it, as the French Middle Guard and it was the French Middle Guard infantry had been staying in position for the beginning of the battle, but then began attacking towards the Austrian and Prussian positions. And sorry about the I'll rehost the game, since it looks like some people or everyone lost connection because of the internet. It's rehosted again. 1 second, let me load up the save again. Actually, we'll go ahead and go to the endgame state of the battle. I think that might explain it better than I can here. There we go. So we saw the table before the battle, and this is what it looked like towards the end. So, as you can see, what I was saying about the French Middle Guards attack, they were trying to assault in the center towards Buchenfeld against the Prussian positions. The Prussians were at this time, I think, being threatened from the south by the attack of General Suzmanovsky's and General Leclerc's, which led them to be forced to retreat somewhat. But they were able to retreat in quite good order while the Middle Guard took some casualties. In this last stage of this battle, that lasted till midday, I think, you can see that the Old Guard Hill is being attacked again. And you can see that all of the blocks have become quite a lot smaller on the infantry side and on the cavalry side. The Old Guard has unfortunately suffered quite a few casualties, and so has the Austrian Grenadier and Cuirassier brigades. And you can see in the north that the infantry of the Prussian 2nd Division is attacking and has taken Limburg from General Del Valle and General Garnau. And in the south there, we can see that the French forces were able to defeat the Bavarians, as mentioned before, but are currently on the defensive as the coalition troops are attacking. And we can see in the east, while there was an attack going in Mansfeld, and there is nearly no French troops left there, as the attack was destroyed by the reinforcements given by the Austrian Reserve, and we can also see that some of the French troops have been captured there in the east. And at this time, the Martin Renaud, Marshal of France, wrote to His Excellency von Klenau to negotiate a ceasefire. But before that, does anyone have any insights they would like to give on the battle? What it seemed like from their point of view, or anything like that?
From my point of view, the most important thing was that it was very much chaos and stress for the first half or so of the battle, because the militia did some questionable actions as far as I understood it, which led to them not very well holding the line. I think this commander here in particular just did whatever he wanted, which led us to like lose that brigade, which was unfortunate. But we ended up holding the line. We had originally already had this planned as a fallback line to hold the original positions and then this hill line here. However far east we would have to. So then it ended up working. A lot of the militia got captured, but that's just how it's gonna be. And overall, it didn't go perfectly. Didn't go horribly. It went quite well. And then
My table crashed again, I think. Did it? Not sure.
yeah, but the stress of constantly collecting troops wherever they were not needed and sending them south, where there were huge holes at the beginning, was quite intense. I ended up shouting at one or two brigade commanders because they were moving too slowly. Fully in character, of course. And,
we'll talk about raging in character later.
Oh God! You want to talk about raging character? Jesus fucking Christ! Look at
Okay, we'll talk about that later after this battle. And I'm really hosting the game again. Yeah, the money of the Prussian or coalition casualties definitely came from the fact that the large numbers of the Prussian militia or reserve troops, which were covering the R, were captured. And I'm also going to, so I created these Wikipedia articles for each battle, and here I've counted the number of troops on both sides. So for the French side, there were 35,000 to 47,000 soldiers and 60 guns, while the coalition had 50,000 to 70,000 soldiers and 42 guns. So the French had more cavalry, which of course isn't nowhere as big as infantry battalions, and the French also had some smaller formations as they had taken quite a few casualties, and the coalition had these really sizable militia forces on their side, or landwehr troops and Prussian reservists. But they were still, I would say that I'm not sure on whose side luck was in this battle really, or who had the upper hand, although we can see how it turned out. And in the battle, the French lost 9,000 to 15,000 soldiers, of which 3,000 to 500 to 6,000 soldiers were captured, and they lost 18 guns. And the coalition, meanwhile, lost 5,000 to 10,000 killed, wounded, or missing, of which 3,000 to 5,000 were captured, and they lost 5 guns. So the casualties still, the French had suffered more casualties in the battle, as they had gotten some formations wiped out in the east, and we'll go with General de la Perriere or General Bertrand or actual General Szymanowski as well, why not? You were part of the corps that had fought in the Battle of Nauheim. What did you feel like the state of the morale of your corps was coming into this battle?
Well, the core was itself shaky, to be sure, but we realized that the main attack was going to come in the north. It was my decision that we do a limited assault in the south. I didn't intend to get any further than Mensfelderkopf and Mensfelden, if we could get that far, and basically try to hold a line there. The idea, of course, being to apply some pressure in the south so that the coalition couldn't concentrate on our attack in the north and hopefully draw some of their forces south. But it was intended to be a limited attack. And the opportunity for our cavalry, which was nicely placed at Flacht and what is that, Niederheisen or whatever, to cut through, which they did do, and come in hopefully onto this road junction up here at the Bucherfeld and be in the rear or the flank of the enemy going in either direction. Seemed like it was just too good to pass up. I did get a little too ambitious. We had a fight at Die Platte, which was completely unexpected and which I was completely blinded to since I wasn't getting any reports. I wasn't getting anything for the first part of the battle. But that went well, and considering how well it had gone, I thought we can probably push as far as Mensfelderkopf. So we started moving up in that direction. I did not know the trouble that Bertrand was in on the right until it was pretty much too late. And I'll let him talk to that because he was leading that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. After that, more coalition forces started arriving just as we got to the Der Kopf region, and they were much stronger than we were. We got pushed back off of there and tried to hold a line where you see us at the end of the battle.
Yeah, to the on the actions around Mensfelden. So basically, we started with one brigade here, second here, and the dragoon regiment. And the plan was to advance to this position, supported by a second brigade. We engaged a Russian cavalry brigade here, which we basically annihilated. But this second brigade on my left flank never arrived to support my attack on Mensfelden. Apparently they had been, by some command confusion, been moving through the woods over here, which I only learned once my brigade was completely overrun and I joined the troops there in the west. Out of a sudden, these Habsburg troops had appeared undetected and overrun us here through this low ground. Not sure how they managed that with that speed, but they did. I sent the dragoons around to attack their flank, but they simply just disappeared. So yeah, after a few turns, I was left with basically two reduced battalions falling back, and I myself went over to join the division commander.
All right. Let's end. Yeah.
Yeah, and then that was when I began pulling back, and I arrived literally, I think, at the last turn of the battle with my own forces to protect the situation. So.
Yes. So this battle was quite remarkable in one thing, because and that was that the the French Guard was basically, it seemed like they were for Renaud's Corps, they were at times the mate shield of the army, you could maybe say. But that's maybe a bit harsh. But the middle guard was charging against the Prussian grenadier positions and the artillery, and the old guard was itself being shelled by the coalition artillery, and it was also being charged multiple times by the grenadiers of the Austrians and the cuirassiers of the Austrians. So what resulted in, and also the Guard cavalry was also fighting a giant melee near the Old Guard hill. So the Old Guard perhaps had, or the Guard as a whole perhaps had not taken this many casualties in a single day, I'm not sure, up to this point. So this battle was very significant in all, I think, in the image of the French army, because the myth of the Guard was perhaps broken in this battle, since the middle guard was unable to push away the coalition of the hills before the ceasefire began, and the coalition and the old guard was also forced to retreat from the hill as the ceasefire was becoming into effect, because the fact that a nearly completely fresh Prussian division was advancing from the north and threatening their position. So this was quite a remarkable battle. And also before the ceasefire was put into effect in midday, the coalition attack was able to push back the French troops back to their defense line on the Aar River, and was also able to liberate these encircled Prussian troops at Flak, but not, unfortunately, not all the prisoners. Now let's go back to the strategic map, and on Klenau, Your Excellency, this was the first time you were meeting the French marshal who had defeated your Russian brothers in arms in the west. So what did you think of your first meeting on the where you declared the ceasefire to begin?
It is difficult to speak of the first meeting now knowing what happened after, but so we agreed on a ceasefire for perhaps too long. But my thinking was still that we defeated them essentially in this battle, and the ceasefire would allow us to leave. I was planning to withdraw, at least at the start, because we were still out of supplies. At least, well, we weren't out of supplies, but the Bavarians were struggling, and we didn't have too much going around. We could have probably done another battle, but that was about it. Other than that, I mean, the conversation wasn't too horrible. I didn't know the monster he was at the time, killing my dear cousin, the Russian general.
Now I need to bring someone up, and General of Division Henry Jean Bernier, do you have a working microphone? Can you talk?
Yeah,
yes.
I'm sitting in the airport right now, so I can't talk much though.
Oh, okay. Well, do you shortly want to go over your relationship with the Marshal Martin Renaud? What happened? What you thought of him after the Battle of Nassau and the Battle of Dietz, and why did you do what you did?
Well, relationship would be a strong word for it. Yeah, I felt my honor as the guard had been spat on, and my guard had been used in frontal assaults against artillery, and I wasn't happy with it. It was my very honor. So, and I didn't like when the marshal killed the Russian generals. Like a few, like cadets or whatever, I wouldn't care. But the two like high-ranking noblemen, I think was too far. for me. Like if he's going to do that to them, he could do that to anyone.
So can you recall what you did after Battle of Dietz then?
I told the marshal I was done. I told my division I was gonna surrender, and I gave them the option to surrender or to keep fighting. And I walked over and surrendered. I didn't want to have any part of that army anymore. Especially it helped that we were losing at that point.
No, what was the coalition reaction to this then?
Him defecting was the initial, and we finally got to know what happened to the Russian generals. We didn't know that so far. Well, I guess it wasn't confirmation, but it was him telling us. And we were, it showed us that the morale was pretty low in the French army, I guess, and that perhaps they were gonna leave instead of us. At the time, we were still honoring the ceasefire, and we're planning to do so as well. But it looked like perhaps the marshal couldn't be trusted to hold his word, so we were taking some preparations in case the ceasefire would break down.
Yeah, I hadn't been able to be at this battle, but Ninja had messaged me a little bit during it, and I think both of us were under a misconception of how badly the army had fared in the battle itself and how strong we were. So at the time, I think we both thought the ceasefire was a good idea because we thought we were in just as bad a state as the French army was at that point. But when Henry, Portal's character came over and was like, he killed he killed the two Russian generals, and his defection was I think both of us realized, oh, they might actually be in a worse position than we are, somehow. And I think we started. It was at that point we requested, I think either Sam requested a prisoner exchange or something, and we used this as an opportunity to start talking to him and getting a better idea of how much he was lying. We were hoping to catch him in a lie.
Which we did. We did.
Yeah, we did.
And he threatened our lives during the ceasefire. Oh.
Yeah, I think that in the second meeting with the French marshal, the situation got kind of heated and even hands-on. Do you want to delve into that? You were meeting on the, I think it was the bridge north of Lacht.
Yes. I mean, kind of decided at the time as a player that one of the Russian generals was going to be my cousin, my distant cousin. Didn't seem too far-fetched to me. And we then confronted him with the information we had that he perhaps had killed them. And he ended up more or less confirming it, I believe.
Well,
I'm
importantly,
not sure if that prompted me to hit him in the face or why I did. But I ended up slapping him and then left.
So what happened was we first met him and he was like, "Oh, the Russian prisoners are far away and the Russian generals are far away. They're not going to get here in time. Let's just do this prisoner exchange." And we're like, "Okay, that's pretty suspicious." And then he blew the bridge at Dietz. And we were like, he clearly blew the bridge at Dietz, and to us this was a violation of the ceasefire to a degree, because this is clearly some form of hostile act or an act that is seen as hostile towards us. He's blowing the bridge so that we can't pursue him, and we were going to use. We assumed that it was that was what happened, so we confronted him about it, and he said that it was deserters had blown up an ammunition dump, and we just didn't believe that. And I think Ninja, I think you said like something along the lines of, and this the channel's open now, but you said like he was accusing us of breaking the ceasefire by not giving him the prisoners, which we withheld after he blew the bridge at Dietz, and he said, then that is a hostile act by not doing that. And I think Ninja essentially said, no, this is a hostile act, and
Oh yeah,
slapped him and then left.
That was way funnier.
So, and then we both. Then essentially, Sam admitted to me that he killed the generals. That the generals were dead. He didn't admit that he killed them, but that they were dead. And we're like, okay, well, you've just confirmed that all the pretense is gone. So to us, the ceasefire was completely broken because we didn't think that any of this. I think both of us kind of forgot that all of the prisoners were in the fields in Dietz. So when
We'll go.
I was completely aware of that.
We'll
I
talk about
forgot.
We'll talk about that later. But first, so this direct aftermath of the Battle of Dietz, as we can see on the table, the troops have somewhat changed their locations, and as you can see, the front line is on the Aar, the river, and the Renaud's Corps is there in Flanders. But yes, I want to talk about the state of the French army after the Battle of Dietz and the morale and maybe the relationship with the Marshal as well.
Fate is a strong word.
Yes, who was the... do want to say that the Marshal was a veteran of the Peninsular War, and he had said that it had created a very harsh perception on him about war and his relationship towards his enemies and his troops. But yes, so let's talk about what the French are thinking after the Battle of Dietz as the ceasefire is going on. So who wants to start? What's happening in the French army?
Well, we are continuously arguing, trying to convince the Marshal to pull back the army instead of, or actually during the ceasefire, while it is still enacted, which he negates, and then even after the negotiations blew up, gave orders to kill all the... We had several thousands of Prussian Landwehr forces captured in Flacht.
This is before the... I would like to talk before the ceasefire broke, actually. But well, you can talk about. We can go over to the ceasefire breaking. But yeah, continue.
Well, again, the basic idea, or what we tried to convince him of, was pulling back the army and trying to develop a plan how to get the army out, preparing routes of march and all that stuff. But that simply didn't happen. And then eventually he decided to give orders to kill thousands of prisoners, and that then completely shattered the army's morale, and well, I don't know, a significant number of soldiers deserted, and there was some unrest in the officer corps.
Sedition, I think, would be the proper term here, I believe. At that point, the general situation in the officer corps was that I believe I called the Marshal a craven. We genuinely did not believe that we were starting to panic. We knew we did not have enough forces to continue fighting. And that, here were the Austrians. Sure, they were beaten and they were out of supplies. And in an ideal world, which unfortunately this is not, we would have been able to say, like, okay, let's wait for a second and let's wait for a few minutes anyway, or for a few days, draw that out, plan a retreat, and then just withdraw from our position, because our position is completely untenable. Unfortunately, that is not what the Marshal decided to do. What the Marshal decided to do was to engage in, first, the actual murder of, like, which that was bad enough, but that wouldn't have been the end of the world, I don't think. I don't think a lot of people would have looked at that and said, this is the end of the world. what that was something that was absolutely like hitting people badly, and really hit into the belief that the Marshal's kind of gone off into his own like cursed world. But the secondary problem was that the Marshal had no plan. We had no plan for a retreat. We were currently a spent force in front of an enemy that, and we were thinking about killing the prisoners. What the fuck are you doing? Like, all due respect, what are you doing? How are you thinking about committing acts of violence when our own force is spent and we have to retreat and he's doing nothing? So trust in the Marshal is evaporating for the people in Bertrand's corps, in Del Perrier's corps. So that would be me, that would be Jan, that would be Achilles, etc. The other part was the people in the Marshal's corps who had been with him during the execution had essentially already kind of lost his trust in him. And the fact that he started doing that, and he didn't tell us, he didn't tell the people who weren't with him what was happening. So we were completely in the dark. He kept it a secret from Bertrand's corps, from the rest of Bertrand's corps, that from Del Perrier's corps, that he had killed the Russians. So by that point, all confidence in him essentially has evaporated.
All right. General de la Perriere, can you tell more about the exact state of your corps' men, rank and filers after the Battle of Dietz? What do you think the situation? Yeah.
Yeah. As far as the rank and file was concerned, my corps was shattered. It was essentially down to a division, if that, in strength out of the original 3. We were combat ineffective, except for elements of the cavalry. There were elements of the cavalry which were still in good shape. So there were no other options. The only option was to extract as much of the force as possible. We had rising desertion, totally wrecked morale. The force was completely incapable of any kind of true resistance or prolonged resistance. So the only thing left was to get them out, and that's what we needed to concentrate our efforts on at that point. As for all the other drama that was going on around the Marshal, I honestly didn't care too much about that. I just wanted him to start giving us a plan for getting the heck out of there. And I also thought that it was, as a pragmatic thing, it was completely impractical to be executing 5,000 prisoners on the verge of an escape. It didn't make any sense to me. We were better served to release them and let them get in the way of the enemy trying to pursue us than wasting what little ammunition and time we had shooting them or killing them. So I just thought it was completely impractical idea. What we really needed was a solid plan of escape, and we needed to start executing it as quickly as we could. And so that was my position. I was just waiting for him to give us the order, and the rest of it I stayed out of.
All right. By the way, the show is rehosted again, and Renka needed to go. So if Jan or Gentice, one of you can stream the game, that would be nice. We're going to be now moving on to the last stages of the game. So there was a lot of talk about killing prisoners. So it seemed like the French Marshal had gotten quite bitter after the ceasefire broke down, and the maybe as well being slapped in the face added to it or something like that. But in the evening of this day, the day that the Battle of Dietz was fought during, the Della Peria's corps was suffering from increasing amount of desertion, as the men had already fought the battles of Lichtenwald in the case of the 3rd Division's infantry, which was very costly, and they had now also lost the battle of Nauheim and Dietz. So the morale was really snowballing, and the troops had not had any snowballing in a bad way, and the infantry had not really gotten a proper day's rest even. There were even some sort of military police squadrons forced. I think you, General Szymanowski, were ordered.
Yeah, I detached some of my cavalry to serve as military police because it was the force was completely collapsing by that point, and the marshal kept like not giving a plan, and I kept basically haranguing him the entire time, going, "We need a plan." We got none. We got absolutely no plan. We got absolutely no information of like, what are we gonna do? Because we have a force that is basically in front of us, and he seems to be doing nothing. He seems to be obsessed with this idea of killing the enemy, of trying to execute via grape shot, which is like horrifying. Literally thousands of the enemy for unknown reasons. While our force was basically broken down, and the trust in the marshal just kept evaporating the entire time for everybody that was there, apparently, because and that I believe was kind of the problem. The marshal was not planning anything. I detached some of my cavalry to serve as military police just to slow down, because otherwise we would have been gone. And when I mean gone, gone. We would not have had anybody to even have a retreat if we didn't. If I hadn't detached like some force to serve as a what's the word? If I hadn't detached some force to even serve as a God, I forgot the word. That's my bad. Yeah, because discipline had evaporated by that point. Completely evaporated.
I then tried to convince the guard commanders to protest against the marshal's orders, which they were not very convinced to do still. And the marshal got word of the meeting and sent a cuirassier squadron or a regiment, I don't know. I think it was even a regiment to chase me down, so I got on the quickest horse I could find and went off to the west to find the emperor.
Yeah, so keep in mind all of this is happening after the ceasefire had broken down. So generals of the coalition, His Excellency von Klenau and von der Marwitz, had ordered an attack to happen towards Dietz, where the French troops, where there were most French troops at, and this was in the early hours of the evening. So twilight of the evening was about to setting, and it was getting dark. And as a retaliation for this bomb, for the breaking down of the ceasefire, in the middle of this bomb barrage, the French marshal began giving out these orders to begin. Can't say anything else but executing the prisoners that the French army had captured during the Battle of Dietz. Now, the execution of these prisoners was not really taken. There were a lot of things which really made it so that it couldn't be proceeded as the Marshal wanted, as the French positions were quite literally being bombarded, as the French ordered these, as the French Marshal ordered these atrocities to take place, and a lot of French generals, like General de Clermont, sent their troops to actually stop these acts and save the Prussian prisoners and let them free, perhaps to also slow down the coalition advance by sending these prisoners freely toward the coalition lines. Meanwhile, very few troops were actually being organized to set up a rear guard action to protect the retreat of the French forces, so the situation was very chaotic. Now we can move on to the turn of the next morning, and it is wherever it is. I wonder if it's this. Excuse me, this is actually going back in time.
Yeah, back in time to 1850.
Yep, there we go, now I found it. So this is the 7th of November, the day after the Battle of Dietz, and the night of this day was spent with the French trying to organize themselves to leave Dietz. And actually, in the middle of this night of fighting, the Marshal himself, Martin Renaud, was arrested by the leader of the Middle Guard. I think it was General Saint Francois, who unfortunately isn't here. But yes, the French High Command was in absolute chaos, basically. Leaders of the coalition forces, can you tell us about the aftermath of the ceasefire breaking down? What was going in through your head as the ceasefire broke down and you began your night attack?
Well, it wasn't supposed to be a night attack. It was supposed to just be the evening, but it ended up going.
But yeah, it dragged into the night.
Yeah. But our whole assumption was that we fought under the assumption that the French wouldn't leave, so we wanted the whole river as a defensive line. So we decided to use the opportunity to free some of the prisoners and push them to the other side of the river. It ended up being even better because they were in the process of leaving, and it was complete chaos in the French army. So I guess it worked out quite well. But we only did a limited offensive in the north, so I guess they got off. They got a little bonus from that.
We potentially should have tried for a larger offensive sooner and broken the ceasefire sooner. We may have been able to have destroyed the French army entirely.
We did not break the ceasefire.
No,
the Marshal did.
I think it may have been in even more of our benefit if we had just betrayed the ceasefire.
I know.
And attacked.
I thought that would be too unrealistic.
Yeah, no. I don't know. I considered it, but I also didn't think that our troops were in that great of a state. And then the next morning, after we made the attack, most of our best troops were tired and had just gone through a large fight. All of the forces that we would have used to pursue the French army were kind of out of sorts. We did make one final attempt to try and catch the southernmost portion of your force because your force had withdrawn in the north, kind of out of our grasp. But in the south, near Lorheim, they were still within grasp, and we tried to make one final attempt to catch you while you were separated by that forest, but it never. It was unable to catch you before you ran away, and once you entered into that forest, I think both Ninja and myself didn't want to pursue through a forest, especially when we had such low supplies, campaign supplies. So we decided that we would march south along the highways and head towards head
Braunschweig, I
towards
believe.
what's that?
Braunschweig, I think, is down there, or what was the big city?
I think we were heading towards Mainz.
Mainz, yeah.
I said Mainz, but I meant like Wiesbaden.
No, yeah, just the big city in the south on the other side
Yeah.
of the river.
Yeah, and we would use that as a toehold over the Rhine. At least that was our intention.
Now, General de la Perriere of the French army, you were before the corps commander of the French army, but now it seemed like you were becoming, after the French commander was being arrested, you were becoming the commander-in-chief of the French forces at the Rhine. So, what was the situation for you as the ceasefire broke down?
Yeah, I became the army commander by default. Once the marshal was under arrest, and at that point it was a case of, well, the first steps first. It's finding out where is everybody, who's in command of what, and then plotting routes of retreat and organizing the rear guard to hold off the coalition so that we could get away. And of course, at that point, you have no idea, how hard are they going to pursue us. I anticipated their infantry would probably be really slow because they had just fought a major battle, but their cavalry could conceivably be right on our tail. So we planned the escape route. We needed to get the northern forces around so that we could join up, basically, or at least be within close supporting range of each other in case. And I wanted our strongest cavalry behind us. So I drew out the routes of withdrawal and the routes of march. And we were heading south, southwest, and then we were going to cut back towards the southeast, and it's what is the name of the town? It's the city on the Rhine that we were headed towards was Castel something like that. I can't recall, but
it's fine.
Yeah, but it's a fortified city with a bridge, so it looked like the best location to try to get the army back across and still be able to hold the river crossing long enough in case we needed to. And that was about it.
Yeah, I'm right now loading the final save of the game. So this is the turn 17, 7th of November midday, and it's the day after the Battle of Dietz, and another day on from the Battle of Nauheim. And then another day more from the Battle of Lichtenwald and the Battle of Nassau itself. And the French army is retreating. They are having a sort of marching pause in the villages of Kurdorf and Eggershausen, and they are forming a sort of defensive line, just a temporary one, while the rest of the troops in the west retreated. And the French baggage trains, I think, were ordered by General de la Perriere to be abandoned and thrown on the road to slow down the coalition advance, which they have done. As the
that's correct.
coalition,
We were turning them over on the road.
Yeah, the coalition troops, I think the Prussian ones go reports that at least that the troops, after being hungry and tired from the battle last days, they started actually feasting on the contents of the French baggage.
Good for them, to be honest, they've earned it.
Yeah. And in the west, the troops in the French, the baggage of Renaud's corps was actually ordered, I forgot to mention, but after the Battle of Nassau, it was ordered to be left to Nassau to make sure the army marches fast to Dietz. And there were also the Russian prisoners of war here, which were captured in the Battle of Nassau there, and they're being escorted now out with one of the brigades of the 4th Division there guarding it. So what's likely going to happen now is that the French army are going to be, as they have even abandoned large amounts of their baggage, they are really doing their best to retreat as fast as they are possible. And they are going to be running out of Nassau, the Duchy of Nassau, back into France. And I do not think that the coalition forces are going to be able to trap them in another battle anymore, since the French have also their pontoon bridges with them, so they can retreat along the river wherever they kind of want, and they might have they actually do have the pontoon bridges still here in Rhine, on the Rhine. So the it's a French marched into Germany, but now they are going to march out of Germany again. And I wrote a Wikipedia article, Wikibox, about the battle, about the 1813 Rhine campaign. I'm going to post it in the chat. And the 1813 Rhine campaign was part of the 6th coalition. It lasted from 2nd of November up to the 6th of November 1813 in the Duchy of Nassau, and historians think that it was a coalition victory, as the French forces at the Rhine failed to decisively defeat the coalition vanguard. And the strength of the coalition force, which was made up of the troops of Austrian General His Excellency Johann von Klenau, the Prussian commander Hans-Georg von der Marwitz, the Prussian commander Joseph Cornelius Auruch, who was executed by the French forces, and the Württembergian troops of Duke Alexander and the Bavarian troops of Prince Karl, consisted of 65,000 to 75,000 troops and 85 guns. Meanwhile, the French forces called the forces at the Rhine were led by Martin Renaud, and later at the end of the campaign completely by General de la Perrière, and they consisted of 45,000 troops to 60,000 and 78 guns. And the casualties in this whole campaign, with all of the desertion after the Battle of Dietz and all of the other battles in combined, the casualties for the coalition are 3,000 to 7,000 killed or wounded, 8,000 to 10,000 captured or missing, and 30 guns lost. And for the French, 5,000 to 10,000 killed or wounded, 15,000 to 20,000 captured or missing, and 35 guns lost. So the Russian corps has largely been destroyed, but the French have lost more men, and it is currently 1813 after the Battle of Leipzig, and the French forces are really scrapping together any men they can. This is not really a kind of campaign that Napoleon at all had hoped for. He would likely had hoped for a quick, decisive defeat on the vulnerable coalition forces, but it seems like it's not what he hoped for. And most importantly, this campaign is likely going to be remembered in history as a relatively insignificant campaign, but as the campaign that led to the myth of the guard kind of breaking, as the old guard took significant battles in the Battle of Dietz and was even forced out of Dietz itself. So what I would predict, even though I don't really live in this universe that this game took place in, and I'm not confident in trying to say everything what happened, but I think that Martin Renaud is not going to be getting his marshal's baton, at least. And
I think
maybe
the only
the
thing he's
college-
getting is an execution.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, but not
Yeah, that's
his
pretty harsh for military failure.
not his platoon, at least. And maybe the coalition commanders are going to get nice villas in Germany. So that was the campaign, and that was the campaign debriefed.